Tonight we find you reclining on a cushioned bench in your sun-drenched atrium, the fountain murmuring its endless approval in the background, when a slave pads softly across the mosaic and extends a wax tablet toward your hand. You take it with the casual grace of someone who receives important correspondence daily. But something about the weight of this particular tablet makes your stomach perform a small, complicated maneuver. The seal is familiar, your friend Lucius, the one who throws those gatherings that everyone talks about for weeks afterward, and you already know, with the grim certainty of a man watching storm clouds gather over the Bay of Naples, that this invitation will require something more from you than just showing up and eating your weight in honeyed dates. You crack the seal, scan the elegant script, and there it is, a picnic. Not a formal dinner in someone's triclinium where the rules are established and the lighting forgiving, but an actual outdoor gathering on the Campus Martius, complete with blankets spread on grass and food that will absolutely, inevitably find its way onto your clothing. And suddenly you're facing the kind of question that has launched 1,000 ships and toppled quite a few political careers. What, exactly, does one wear to a Roman picnic? The toga. The word hangs there in your mind like a sentence. You've worn one hundreds of times, of course, every adult male citizen has, for any occasion that matters even slightly, but this is different. This is the social equivalent of walking a tightrope while wearing a blanket that weighs as much as a small child and requires approximately the same amount of maintenance. You probably won't survive this with your dignity intact, but that's not really the point. The point is that you have to try, and everyone else will be trying too, and none of you will admit to trying because that would defeat the entire purpose of pretending that Roman fashion comes as naturally as breathing. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The invitation sits on the marble table beside you, and you find yourself reading it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less anxiety-inducing. Casual gathering, Lucius has written, which in Rome means absolutely nothing. You've been to gatherings described as casual where men showed up in the most formal togas imaginable, starched within an inch of their lives and draped with a kind of precision that suggests they started getting dressed around noon the previous day. You've also been to gatherings described as formal where someone's cousin from the countryside arrived in a toga that looked like it had been used to transport vegetables, and the ensuing whispers followed that poor man for months. The Roman social memory is long and merciless, and fashion mistakes have a way of becoming the kind of stories people tell at dinner parties for years afterward, usually while gesturing subtly in your direction with a piece of bread. You pick up the tablet again and study the details. The picnic will begin in the late afternoon, continuing into the evening, which means you'll be dealing with both the harsh sun of the dying day and the cooler temperatures that follow sunset. This is already a problem, because the toga, for all its symbolic weight as the garment of Roman citizenship, was not designed with comfort in mind. Wool, you reflect, is a fascinating material. It keeps shepherds warm in the mountains and functions admirably as a blanket during chilly nights. It is less successful as formal wear in the Italian climate, particularly when that climate involves direct sunlight and the kind of humidity that makes the Tiber Valley feel like a steam bath for half the year. And yet here you are, contemplating exactly which woolen garment to wear to an outdoor event, because the alternative, showing up in something casual, something Greek-influenced, something that might actually be pleasant to wear, would mark you as either eccentric or barbarian, and in Rome those categories overlap more than you'd like to admit. You set the tablet down and walk to the edge of the atrium, watching the light play across the surface of the fountain. The fish dart and shimmer, oblivious to your existential fashion crisis. A slave approaches silently, refilling your wine cup without being asked, and you wonder if they can sense your agitation. Probably, you decide. They notice everything. They've certainly noticed the way you've been staring at that wax tablet for the past quarter hour, turning it over in your hands like a puzzle box that might explode if solved incorrectly. You take a sip of wine and try to think strategically. The key to any social appearance is understanding not just what you're wearing, but what everyone else will be wearing, and adjusting accordingly within the narrow band of acceptability that Roman society permits. This is difficult enough when the event takes place indoors, where the lighting can be controlled and the seating arrangements provide some cover. Outdoors, under the unforgiving Italian sun, every fold and drape will be visible to everyone, and everyone will have an opinion about what those folds and drapes signify. You think back to last year's Saturnalia, when your cousin Marcus showed up in a toga that was clearly too short. It barely reached his ankles, and spent the entire evening pretending not to notice the glances. People talked about it for months. They're probably still talking about it, in certain circles. And Marcus is a decent enough fellow, not the sort who usually attracts gossip, but that one fashion misstep has attached itself to his reputation like a burr. Every time his name comes up, someone mentions the toga. "Oh, Marcus," they'll say. "You know, the one with the too short toga at Saturnalia." It's become his defining characteristic, which seems unfair given that he's actually quite accomplished in other areas, but that's Rome for you. Get one thing wrong and it follows you forever, while getting 100 things right earns you approximately nothing in the public memory. You finish your wine and signal for more. The afternoon light is beginning to soften, the shadows growing longer across the atrium floor, and you realize you've spent most of the day obsessing over an event that hasn't even happened yet. This is not unusual. The Roman mind, when confronted with social uncertainty, tends to spiral into increasingly elaborate scenarios of potential embarrassment, each one more detailed and horrifying than the last. You've imagined yourself arriving in a toga that's too formal while everyone else wears something relaxed, and you've imagined the opposite scenario with equal vividness. You've imagined the toga coming unwrapped mid-picnic, leaving you exposed and scrambling for cover. You've imagined spilling wine on yourself, or worse, having someone else spill wine on you, and the complicated social calculus of whether to accept their apology graciously or demand compensation for the garment damage. These scenarios play out in your mind like scenes from a particularly anxious play, and you are both the actor and the audience, watching yourself make mistakes you haven't actually made yet. The slave returns with more wine, and you take the cup gratefully. Perhaps, you think, you're overthinking this. Perhaps everyone else is just as uncertain as you are, and they're all sitting in their own atriums right now, staring at their own invitations and wondering the same things. Perhaps Lucius himself, the host of this gathering, is currently engaged in his own fashion crisis, trying to decide what message his choice of toga will send to his guests. This is the great secret of Roman social life, the thing no one admits but everyone knows. We are all pretending to know what we're doing, and the pretense is the only thing that holds everything together. The confidence you see in other men at these gatherings is largely performance, a mask worn over uncertainty, and the mask works precisely because everyone agrees to pretend it's real. You set down your cup and pick up the tablet one last time, tracing the letters with your finger. Casual gathering, it says, and you decide, with the resignation of a man accepting his fate, that you'll interpret this as meaning a toga that's clean and properly draped but not aggressively formal. No excessive starching, no obsessive attention to every fold, just a respectable garment that says, "I am a Roman citizen who understands the rules," without shouting, "I spent 4 hours preparing for a picnic." It's a compromise, and like most compromises, it leaves you feeling vaguely unsatisfied, but it's the best you can do with the information available. You'll wear your best everyday toga, the one that's seen enough use to be comfortable but still maintains its dignity, and you'll hope that everyone else has made similar calculations. And if they haven't, if you arrive to find everyone in aggressively casual Greek attire or, worse, in full formal regalia, well, that's a problem for future you. Present you has done enough worrying for one afternoon. The toga. You've been wearing variations of this garment since you were a boy, when you first exchanged your child's bulla for the plain white wool of manhood, and yet you've never quite made peace with it. Standing now in your dressing room, running your fingers along the stack of folded wool that represents your public identity, You find yourself cataloging everything wrong with this supposedly sacred garment. It's heavy, for starters. A proper toga weighs somewhere between 6 and 8 pounds, which means you're essentially carrying a small child draped across your body all day. It's hot, because wool retains heat like a furnace, and the Mediterranean sun has strong opinions about that. It's awkward, requiring constant adjustment and threatening to unwind at the worst possible moments. And yet, for all these practical failures, the toga remains the non-negotiable uniform of Roman citizenship, the garment that separates you from the foreigners, the slaves, and everyone else who doesn't belong. You lift the top toga from the stack and hold it up, letting the fabric fall in a long curve. The shape is distinctive, not a simple rectangle like the Greek himation, but a complex semicircle that requires specific cutting and careful construction. This one is your best everyday toga, made from wool that's been bleached to a respectable white without the aggressive brightness that screams, "I just bought this and have no idea what I'm doing." The bleaching process itself is something you've never fully understood, involving some combination of sulfur fumes and a particular type of clay from the hills near Tivoli, and you're vaguely grateful that you don't have to handle it yourself. Your slaves manage the laundry, and you prefer not to think too deeply about what they do to achieve that acceptable off-white color that says clean and proper without shouting, "Look at me, I'm excessively wealthy." The weight settles into your hands, and you remember the first time you tried to put one on alone. You were 16, newly invested with the toga virilis, and your father had insisted that part of becoming a man meant learning to dress yourself without assistance. 3 hours later, you emerged from your room looking like you'd been attacked by a particularly aggressive bedsheet, and your father, to his credit, didn't laugh. He just nodded, walked over, and spent the next 20 minutes showing you the proper technique while you stood there burning with adolescent humiliation. You've never quite forgiven him for that lesson, even though you've used it hundreds of times since, and you suspect that's exactly how Roman parenting is supposed to work, inflicting just enough embarrassment to ensure the lesson sticks forever. The fundamental problem with the toga, you've come to realize, is that it wasn't designed by anyone who actually had to wear it for extended periods. The Etruscans, who may or may not have originated the garment, apparently used something similar as a practical cloak for working outdoors, a simple wrapped rectangle that kept farmers warm without demanding constant attention. But the Romans, in their infinite wisdom, took this practical garment and transformed it into a symbol of citizenship, adding layers of complexity and ritual until it became something entirely different. The toga you're holding now bears only a distant relationship to those Etruscan work garments. It's larger, heavier, and draped in a specific way that requires either years of practice or a dedicated slave to achieve correctly. It's a garment designed to be impossible to manage alone, which means that wearing one properly signals not just your citizenship but your access to assistance, the ultimate Roman flex, hidden in plain sight. You drape the toga over a chair and consider its various parts, the terminology floating up from memory like bubbles in a fish tank. The sinus is the curved fold that hangs across your chest, creating that distinctive pouch-like effect that painters love to emphasize in portraits. The umbo is the heavy mass of fabric you gather at your waist, which helps hold everything in place but also adds another layer of insulation to an already warm garment. The lacinier is the trailing end that should, in theory, hang neatly to your ankles, though in practice it's usually dragging through whatever happens to be on the ground. And then there's the balteus, the fold you create by pulling the fabric tight across your chest, which is supposed to stay in place through a combination of friction, careful wrapping, and prayers to whichever gods oversee textile engineering. Historians still argue whether the toga's impracticality was accidental or deliberate. Some suggest that the garment evolved organically from simpler wraps, gaining weight and complexity over centuries without anyone consciously deciding to make it worse. Others propose that the very inconvenience of the toga was the point, that making citizenship physically uncomfortable ensured that only people who genuinely valued the status would maintain it, and that the difficulty of wearing one properly created a natural barrier between those who belonged and those who didn't. You lean toward the second theory, mostly because it explains so much about Roman psychology. Everything in this city is designed to be slightly harder than it needs to be, as if comfort itself were suspect and ease a sign of moral weakness. Your ancestors conquered the known world while wearing armor that weighed twice what your toga does, and they probably would have looked at your complaints with the same contempt you feel when you hear Greeks going on about the comfort of their himations. The color, too, carries meaning beyond mere aesthetics. Pure white togas, candidates for office wear them, and the effect is striking but deeply impractical. One stumble in the mud and your political career is over before it starts. Most men wear togas that have settled into a comfortable off-white, the result of careful washing and the inevitable yellowing that comes with age and wear. The very wealthy sometimes have togas bleached to an aggressive brightness, but this marks them as either nouveau riches or men running for office, neither of which is an identity you want to project at a casual picnic. Then there are the togas with stripes, the narrow purple stripe of the equestrian order, the broad stripe of the senatorial class, and these introduce another layer of anxiety entirely. Your own toga bears the narrow stripe, marking you as a member of the equestrian order, which is exactly the kind of status marker that feels neither here nor there in social situations. Too prominent to ignore, not prominent enough to impress anyone who matters. You run your thumb along the stripe, feeling the slightly different texture of the purple-dyed wool. The dye itself is another complication, imported at enormous expense from the Eastern Mediterranean, extracted from sea snails in a process so labor-intensive that a single stripe costs more than most people earn in a year. Your family isn't wealthy enough to afford Tyrian purple, that deep, almost bloody shade reserved for imperial use, but the standard purple of the equestrian stripe still represents a significant investment. You're essentially wearing your tax bracket, woven directly into the fabric, and everyone who sees you will make instant calculations about your status, your family connections, and your eligibility for various forms of social advancement. The picnic, you realize, isn't really about food or relaxation. It's about all of this: the silent assessment, the constant calculation, the endless performance of identity through clothing choices you barely control. The afternoon light shifts through your dressing room window, casting long shadows across the floor, and you find yourself still holding the toga, still running through the mental inventory of what it means and what it demands. You think about your Greek friends, the ones who've adopted Roman citizenship but maintained their cultural practices, and how they must view this entire elaborate ritual. They wear their himations with casual grace, simple rectangles of fabric that require no complex wrapping, no constant adjustment, no anxious assessment of stripe width and bleaching intensity. They show up to gatherings looking comfortable and relaxed, and you show up looking like you've been wrestling a woolen octopus for the past hour, and somehow you're supposed to believe that your way is superior because it's more Roman. The logic doesn't quite hold, but you've never been brave enough to question it aloud. And yet, for all your complaints, you can't imagine showing up to Lucius's picnic in anything else. The thought crosses your mind, briefly, almost rebelliously, and you dismiss it immediately. You could wear a Greek himation, certainly. You own several, acquired during various trips to the East and kept for occasions when you want to be comfortable in your own home. But wearing one to a public gathering, even a casual picnic among friends, would mark you as something other than fully Roman, and that's a label you've spent your entire life trying to avoid. Your grandfather fought in the legions, your father served as a magistrate in a minor provincial town, and you've inherited both their citizenship and their anxiety about maintaining it properly. You are Roman, which means you wear the toga, which means you suffer, and the suffering itself becomes proof of your identity. It's circular, uncomfortable, and utterly inescapable. You set down the toga and find yourself drifting toward the window, your mind pulling at a memory like a loose thread in an otherwise intact garment. Last year's picnic, the one your cousin Marcus attended with his unfortunately short toga, was not the only fashion disaster of the season. There was also your uncle's neighbor, a well-meaning man named Gaius who showed up in what he clearly believed was the height of fashion. A toga draped in the old style, the kind your grandfather might have worn, with a deep sinus that hung nearly to his knees and an umbo gathered so high on his chest that he looked like he was preparing for a storm at sea. The effect was, to put it charitably, distinctive. The whispers started before he'd even found a place on the picnic blankets, and by the time he left, 3 separate people had asked him, with varying degrees of sincerity, whether he'd recently returned from a long journey to the countryside where they still did things the old way. The memory makes you wince, not because you felt particularly sorry for Gaius, he seemed genuinely confused by the reaction, but because it illustrates how quickly fashion shifts in Rome, and how merciless the consequences can be for those who don't keep up. You'd always assumed, in your younger years, that the toga was essentially timeless, a garment so bound up in tradition that it never changed. But the truth is more complicated. Roman fashion evolves constantly, driven by the same forces that drive fashion anywhere. The wealthy and powerful adopt new styles, everyone else copies them, and anyone who misses the transition ends up looking like they've been living in a cave for the past decade. The toga you're considering for today's picnic is different from the one your father wore at your age, and his was different from his father's, and the pace of change seems only to accelerate as the empire grows. You turn from the window and walk back to the chair, running your hand along the folded wool. The current style, the one that's been fashionable for the past few years, emphasizes a certain casual elegance, or at least, as much casual elegance as a 7-pound wool blanket can manage. The sinus should drape in soft curves across the chest, not too tight, not too loose. The umbo should gather at the waist with what looks like effortless grace, though you know from experience that achieving that effortless look requires approximately 45 minutes of careful adjustment. The overall effect should suggest that you simply threw on your toga without thinking, that you're so comfortable with Roman identity that you don't need to try. This is, of course, complete fiction. But fiction is the foundation of all successful social performance. The old style, the one Gaius was accidentally wearing, featured a much deeper sinus and a higher umbo, creating a more dramatic silhouette that now reads as outdated and faintly ridiculous. Your grandmother, if she was still alive, would probably prefer that style. She always said that modern togas looked like they were falling off, but your grandmother isn't the one attending Lucius's picnic. The other guests will be men your age or slightly younger, men who've grown up with the current fashion and internalized its rules so thoroughly that they can spot a deviation from across the campus martius. You've done it yourself, caught yourself judging someone's drape before you've even spoken to them. And the hypocrisy doesn't make you feel any better about being on the receiving end of similar judgment. And then there are the sumptuary laws, because of course Rome has laws about clothing. You try to remember the details, something about who can wear what, based on class and wealth and maybe also the phase of the moon, but the specifics blur together in a haze of senatorial decrees and imperial edicts. The basic principle is simple enough. Clothing should reflect your station, and anyone caught dressing above their class faces penalties ranging from fines to social ostracism. In practice, this means you need to know not just what's fashionable, but what's legal, and the two categories don't always align. Purple dye, for instance, is strictly regulated. The deep Tyrian purple is reserved for the emperor and his immediate family, while the lighter shades are available to senators and equestrians in specific contexts. Wear the wrong purple and you're not just unfashionable, you're potentially treasonous. You've never quite understood why the state cares so much about what people wear. The official explanation involves maintaining social order and preventing the lower classes from appropriating symbols of status they haven't earned. The unofficial explanation, the one you suspect is closer to the truth, is that the elite classes need constant reassurance that their status means something, and clothing provides visible proof of hierarchy. When everyone knows that only senators can wear the broad purple stripe, every senator who walks down the street carries his identity visibly, and every non-senator who sees him is reminded of his place. The system works because everyone participates in it, and the penalties for deviation, both legal and social, are severe enough to keep most people in line. But the sumptuary laws create their own anxieties, particularly at events like picnics where the boundaries between formal and casual blur. You're reasonably confident that your equestrian stripe is appropriate for any gathering of citizens, but what about the accessories? What about the fibula you plan to use to secure your toga at the shoulder? Is that simple bronze pin acceptable? Or should you wear the silver one your father gave you? Or would that be seen as showing off? The laws don't specify, which means you're thrown back on social convention, which means you have to guess what everyone else will do, which means you're right back where you started. Standing in your dressing room, holding a toga, paralyzed by the weight of unspoken rules. You think about Lucius, the host of today's gathering, and try to remember what he wore to the last event you attended together. It was a dinner party, several months ago, and he'd worn a toga with an unusually deep sinus, not as deep as Gaius's old-style disaster, but deeper than the current fashion strictly dictated. You remember noticing it, wondering if it was a statement or a mistake, and then you remember deciding that it didn't matter because Lucius is wealthy enough and connected enough to wear whatever he wants. That's another layer to the fashion anxiety. The rules apply differently to different people. A consul can show up in a toga that hasn't been updated since the Punic Wars, and people will call it charmingly old-fashioned. A merchant who made his money last year and bought his citizenship the year before could wear the exact same garment, and people would call it proof that he doesn't belong. The garment itself is neutral. The context and the wearer determine everything. You're neither consul nor newly wealthy merchant, which means you occupy that uncomfortable middle ground where the rules apply strictly and deviations carry real consequences. Too fashionable and you're trying too hard, signaling insecurity about your status. Not fashionable enough and you're out of touch, signaling that you don't move in circles where style matters. The sweet spot is narrow, constantly shifting, and nearly impossible to hit consistently. You've managed it before. You've attended gatherings where you felt, for a few hours, that you'd made exactly the right choices. But the memory of those successes only increases the pressure to repeat them. One wrong move and you'll join the ranks of Marcus with his short toga and Gaius with his old-style drape, becoming a cautionary tale that hosts tell at future gatherings to illustrate what not to do. The afternoon is wearing on, and you realize you've been standing here for nearly an hour, trapped in a spiral of fashion anxiety that would be funny if it weren't so genuinely distressing. Your slaves have probably noticed, because they notice everything, and they're probably exchanging knowing glances in whatever corner of the house they occupy when not attending to your needs. You imagine them discussing your indecision in low voices, placing bets on how many togas you'll reject before settling on the one you should have chosen in the first place. The thought is humiliating and oddly comforting. At least someone is getting entertainment from your suffering. You pick up the toga again, the familiar weight settling into your hands, and make a decision. You'll wear this one, your best everyday toga, with the equestrian stripe that marks your class without screaming for attention. You'll drape it in the current style, aiming for that elusive casual elegance that suggests effortlessly while requiring maximum effort. You'll wear the bronze fibula, not the silver, because silver at a picnic feels like overcompensation. And you'll hope, you'll pray to whatever gods oversee social gatherings and fashion choices, that everyone else has made similar calculations, and that today's picnic will be remembered for the food and conversation rather than for one man's unfortunate wardrobe decisions. The moment of decision has arrived, and you're standing in your dressing room facing the full spectrum of your wardrobe like a general surveying troops before battle. The stack of togas on the chair represents not just fabric but identity, each one carrying its own set of implications and potential embarrassments. You run through them methodically, lifting each garment and considering its strengths and weaknesses with the same careful attention you might give to selecting the right weapon for a hunt. This is, in its own way, just as important as any military preparation. The wrong choice on the battlefield gets you killed quickly. The wrong choice at a picnic gets you killed slowly, through social exclusion and whispered ridicule that follows you for years. Your ceremonial toga, the one you wear for religious festivals and official appearances, sits at the bottom of the stack where you'd buried it deliberately. This is the Toga candida, so aggressively whitened with chalk that it practically glows in direct sunlight, and wearing it to a picnic would be like showing up to a poetry reading in full military regalia. The chalk treatment makes the fabric stiff and uncomfortable, and the brightness draws attention in ways that feel desperate rather than distinguished. Men running for office wear these togas precisely because they attract attention. Candidates need to be seen, need to stand out in crowds, need to project an image of pure Roman virtue unsullied by the yellowing that ordinary wear produces. You're not running for anything, thank the gods, which means you can leave the chalk-white nightmare where it belongs, at the bottom of the stack, safely out of consideration. Above it sits your winter toga, heavier than the others, woven from thicker wool that provides actual warmth during the chilly months when the Tiber freezes at the edges and everyone huddles closer to their braziers. This one is tempting, briefly, because you remember how cold picnics can get once the sun goes down and the evening chill settles over the campus Martius. But the afternoon will be warm, the invitation specified late afternoon, which means you'll be arriving while the sun still has some heat, and wearing the winter toga would leave you sweating through the first hours while everyone else lounges comfortably in their lighter garments. You could bring it as a spare, you suppose, draped over your arm for when the temperature drops, but that introduces its own complications. What do you do with a spare toga during a picnic? Where do you put it? How do you explain carrying around an extra 7 pounds of wool without looking like you're either excessively anxious about the weather or excessively wealthy in togas? The questions multiply faster than you can answer them. The summer togas are next, and these are the ones you actually wear most days. Lighter wool, less aggressively bleached, comfortable enough that you sometimes forget you're wearing them. You have 3 in regular rotation, each at a slightly different stage of wear and washing, and you consider them now with the attention of a connoisseur examining wine. The newest one is still slightly stiff, not yet broken into that perfect softness that comes from repeated wear and careful laundering. The oldest one is almost too soft, the fabric beginning to thin in places, the purple stripe slightly faded despite your slave's best efforts to maintain it. The middle one, the one you reach for most often, sits between them in the stack, comfortable but not worn out, presentable but not pretentious, the sartorial equivalent of the porridge that Goldilocks eventually declared just right. You lift this middle toga and hold it up to the light, checking for any stains or imperfections that might have escaped your slave's attention. The fabric is good, a respectable off-white that will read as clean and proper without screaming about it. The stripe is intact, the purple still deep enough to signal your equestrian status without the aggressive brightness that would suggest you've recently refreshed it. The weight is right, light enough for the afternoon warmth, heavy enough to provide some coverage when the evening cools. This, you decide, is the one. This is the toga you'll wear to Lucius's picnic, assuming you can get through the next hour without talking yourself into a different choice entirely. But the toga is only part of the equation, and you know this even as you set the garment aside and turn to the other elements of your ensemble. The tunic underneath, for instance, the linen garment that provides the foundation for everything else. You normally wear a simple white tunic, undecorated, the kind that any Roman citizen might wear regardless of class. But today you find yourself considering alternatives. There's the tunic with the narrow purple clavi, those vertical stripes that echo the toga's own status markers, and wearing it would create a kind of visual harmony that might read as either sophisticated or excessive. There's the tunic you bought in Greece last year, cut in a slightly different style, softer and more comfortable than your Roman ones, and wearing it would be a small act of rebellion that no one would notice unless they looked closely. And there's the old tunic, the one with the small tear you've been meaning to have mended, which is absolutely not an option no matter how comfortable it might be. You choose the simple white tunic, the safe choice, the one that says nothing and therefore cannot say the wrong thing. It's not exciting, but excitement is not the goal here. The goal is to arrive, to be present, to participate in the gathering without becoming the subject of it. The goal is to be so appropriately dressed that no one remembers what you wore, because the worst fashion outcome is not ridicule but memorability. You want to blend into the pleasant background of the picnic, a respectable Roman citizen enjoying an afternoon with friends, your clothing so perfectly suited to the occasion that it becomes invisible. This is the paradox at the heart of all fashion anxiety. The only way to succeed is to be forgotten. The accessories come next, and here the possibilities for error multiply exponentially. Your calcii, the shoes you'll wear, must strike the right balance between formal and casual. The senatorial shoes with their crescent-shaped buckles would be too much, suggesting you're trying to elevate yourself above your station. The simple sandals you wear around the house would be too little, suggesting you don't understand that a picnic, however casual, is still a public appearance. You settle on your everyday outdoor shoes, the ones with enough sole to handle grass and uneven ground but enough style to pass muster among peers. They're slightly scuffed, which bothers you until you remember that you'll be walking on grass and dirt anyway, and that arriving with pristine shoes would mark you as someone who doesn't actually plan to participate in the picnic experience. The fibula for your shoulder, you decided on bronze, but now you hold the bronze pin in your hand and second-guess yourself. It's a simple piece, functional rather than decorative, the kind of thing a man might wear without thinking. But is that the right message? Is simple and functional what you want to project? Or does that read as cheap? You have a silver fibula, inherited from your father, with a small engraving that marks it as family property. Wearing it would connect you to your heritage, remind people that you come from a line of respectable citizens, signal that you have resources without flaunting them. The bronze pin says nothing, which could be read as either humility or poverty. The silver pin says something. But what exactly? The anxiety spirals outward, each consideration leading to 3 more, and you find yourself standing frozen with a fibula in each hand like a man trying to decide between 2 equally uncertain futures. Your ring. You wear one always, a simple gold band that marks you as a citizen of sufficient status to own such things. But should you wear others? You have a signet ring, inherited like the fibula, used for sealing documents and marking your identity in official contexts. Wearing it to a picnic feels like bringing your legal documents to a dinner party. Technically permissible, but suggesting that you can't separate your public identity from your private life. You leave it in its box, along with the other rings you've accumulated over the years. A Greek cameo you bought on a trip to Corinth, a bronze ring set with a carnelian that you wore as a young man before you could afford gold, a ring your mother gave you that you never wear because it's slightly too small and cutting off circulation seems like a high price for sentimentality. The belt presents another decision point. Your everyday belt is leather, simple, functional, with a bronze buckle that matches the fibula you've tentatively chosen. Your formal belt is leather too, but decorated with small silver studs, more decorative than functional, the kind of thing that draws the eye and invites comment. You choose the simple belt, matching the simple fibula, creating a unified aesthetic that says I dressed myself without thinking too hard about it, even though you've been thinking about it for approximately 3 hours now. You lay everything out on the bed, arranging the garments and accessories in the order you'll put them on. Tunic first, then shoes, then belt, then the complex ritual of the toga itself, and finally the fibula to secure everything at the shoulder. The arrangement looks almost like a diagram, a visual representation of the choices you've made and the identity you're constructing. And standing here, looking at this collection of fabric and metal, you're struck by how much weight, literal and metaphorical, these objects carry. They're just things, materials gathered from various parts of the empire, woven and shaped by hands you'll never know. But in the context of this afternoon, in the specific social situation of Lucius's picnic, they become something more. They become you, or at least the version of you that will appear before your friends and peers, the version that will be judged and remembered and discussed in the days that follow. You take a deep breath and begin to dress, starting with the tunic, pulling the soft linen over your head and settling it around your body. The fabric is cool against your skin, comfortable, familiar. The shoes go on next, the leather still slightly stiff from lack of wear. The belt cinches at your waist, holding the tunic in place, creating the foundation on which everything else will rest. And then you turn to the toga, that 7-pound bundle of anxiety and tradition, and you prepare to perform the ritual that will transform you from a man in his dressing room into a Roman citizen ready for a picnic. The toga lies across your bed like a sleeping animal, deceptively peaceful, and you approach it with the careful respect of someone who has been burned before. You've been wrapping yourself in this garment for decades now, and yet the process never becomes automatic, never settles into the kind of unconscious routine that governs other aspects of your dressing. Every time is a negotiation, a fresh encounter with the fundamental awkwardness of transforming a semicircle of wool into something that resembles the statues in the Forum. Your slaves could do it for you, they've offered, many times, but something in you resists the idea of being dressed like a child or an invalid. You're a Roman citizen, capable of managing your own clothing, even if that capability requires approximately 45 minutes of muttered curses and minor adjustments. You pick up the toga and hold it by the straight edge, letting the curved hem fall toward the floor. The first step is finding the right point along that straight edge, the place where the fabric will sit at your left shoulder, creating the foundation for everything that follows. Too far forward and the drape will be unbalanced, too much fabric pooling at your chest while your back is left exposed. Too far back and you'll spend the entire picnic fighting to keep the material from sliding off your shoulder entirely. There's a spot, theoretically, that marks the perfect balance, and you found it maybe 3 times in your life without subsequent adjustment. Most days you aim for close enough and trust that the wrapping process will correct minor errors. You drape the chosen section over your left shoulder, letting the bulk of the fabric fall down your back. This is the moment when the toga feels most like a costume, most alien, most likely to defeat you entirely. The weight settles against your spine, warm and insistent, and you resist the urge to shrug it off and reach for something simpler. A Greek himation, for instance, would be on your body by now, wrapped and settled and comfortable, leaving you free to think about other things. But you're not Greek, you remind yourself, and this is not the time to experiment with cultural identity. You're Roman, and Romans wear togas, and Romans suffer through the wrapping process because that suffering is part of what makes them Roman. Your left hand holds the fabric in place at your shoulder while your right hand reaches behind you, gathering the material that hangs down your back. This is the part that always feels like wrestling an octopus. The toga seems to have opinions about where it wants to go, and those opinions rarely align with your own. You pull the fabric around your body, passing it under your right arm and across your chest, creating the first layer of the drape. The wool is soft against your skin, warm from your body heat, and for a moment the garment feels almost comfortable, almost natural. Then you release your left hand to adjust the fold at your shoulder, and the entire construction shifts slightly, and you're back to square one with the added complication of knowing how close you came to success. You start again, because starting again is the only option. The toga doesn't care about your frustration, doesn't respond to anger or pleading, just sits there in your hands waiting for you to figure it out. This time you move more slowly, more deliberately, talking yourself through each step in a low murmur that your slaves probably hear through the door. Left shoulder first, you mutter, hold it there, gather the back, bring it around, create the fold, adjust the sinus, check the length. The words become a kind of prayer, a ritual invocation of the steps you've performed hundreds of times, and gradually the fabric begins to cooperate. The sinus takes shape across your chest, that characteristic curved fold that distinguishes the Roman toga from all other garments. The umbo gathers at your waist, the heavy mass of fabric that will hold everything in place once you secure it properly. The laceania falls to your ankle, not dragging on the floor, not riding too high, but hanging exactly as it should. You stand perfectly still, afraid that any movement will undo what you've accomplished. The toga feels almost right, not perfect, but close enough that only you will notice the imperfections. The sinus could be slightly deeper, maybe, or the umbo gathered just a finger's width higher. But the afternoon light through your window catches the folds in a way that looks almost intentional, almost artistic, and you decide to accept this version of yourself rather than chasing an impossible ideal. You reach for the bronze fibula, the simple pin you chose earlier, and secure the toga at your right shoulder. The pin slides through the fabric, catching just enough layers to hold everything in place without creating visible distortion. This is the moment of commitment, the point at which you declare the wrapping complete and accept whatever consequences follow. You turn to face the full-length mirror that stands in the corner of your dressing room, a luxury your father would have considered excessive but that you've come to depend on. The reflection shows a man in a toga, which is exactly what it should show, but you find yourself scrutinizing every detail with the intensity of a sculpture critic examining a new commission. The sinus drapes across your chest in a curve that's acceptable, if not magnificent. The umbo gathers at your waist with reasonable grace. The overall silhouette suggests a Roman citizen of the equestrian class, neither too formal nor too casual, prepared for an afternoon picnic without appearing to have prepared at all. You turn slightly, checking the back, making sure the fabric falls evenly and doesn't bunch in ways that will become uncomfortable after hours of sitting and reclining. And then you notice it, a small fold at your left shoulder where the fabric has twisted slightly, creating a diagonal line that draws the eye and disrupts the otherwise smooth drape. It's minor, barely visible, the kind of detail that no one else would notice unless they were specifically looking for flaws. But you notice it, and now that you've noticed it, you can't unnotice it. The fold sits there like a challenge, like proof that you're not quite as competent as you pretend to be, like evidence that somewhere in the wrapping process you made a small error that will now haunt you for the entire afternoon. You reach up to adjust it, and the movement shifts the entire construction, and suddenly the toga that was almost perfect is sliding off your shoulder in slow motion. You catch it before it falls completely, but the damage is done. The sinus is wrinkled, the umbo displaced, the careful balance you achieved completely destroyed. You stand there holding the toga against your body, one hand at your shoulder, the other at your waist, trapped in a pose that would look dramatic in a painting but feels ridiculous in reality. The mirror reflects your predicament with merciless accuracy. A middle-aged Roman citizen, half-dressed, clutching his garment like a man clinging to a sinking ship. Your slaves are definitely watching through whatever gap exists in the door, and they're definitely finding this entertaining. And you can't even blame them because you'd probably find it entertaining too if the roles were reversed. You release the toga and let it fall, watching the white wool pool at your feet like a deflated version of Roman identity. The garment lies there, innocent and unresponsive, bearing no grudge for your failure, ready to be picked up and tried again. You pick it up, because what else can you do? The alternative is cancelling your attendance at the picnic, sending a slave with a message about sudden illness or unexpected business, and spending the afternoon hiding in your house like a child afraid of social judgment. You're better than that, or at least you want to believe you're better than that, so you pick up the toga and start again. This time you approach the process with a kind of resigned determination, accepting that perfection is probably impossible and that good enough will have to suffice. You move through the steps more quickly, less obsessively, trusting the fabric to do what fabric does and your body to do what bodies do. The left shoulder finds its spot, the back fabric gathers and wraps, the sinus forms across your chest with minimal adjustment, the umbo settles at your waist without excessive coaxing. You check the length, confirm that the lacinia hangs correctly, and secure everything with the fibula before you have time to second-guess any of it. Then you turn to the mirror and evaluate the result. It's not perfect. The sinus is slightly asymmetrical, the umbo a bit higher on one side than the other, the overall drape missing that casual elegance you were hoping for. But it's acceptable. It's a toga on a man, which is what the occasion requires, and the imperfections are minor enough that only you will notice them, and even you will probably stop noticing them once you're distracted by food and conversation and wine. You take a deep breath and accept this version of yourself, this slightly imperfect Roman citizen heading out for an afternoon with friends. The toga feels warm against your skin, familiar now that it's settled into place, and you realize that some part of you actually enjoys this ritual despite all the anxiety it produces. The wrapping, the adjusting, the final acceptance. It's a kind of meditation, a physical practice that connects you to generations of Roman men who stood in similar rooms performing the same actions, struggling with the same fabric, reaching the same imperfect peace with their public selves. You check yourself in the mirror one last time, smoothing a minor wrinkle here, adjusting the fall of the sinus there, making the small corrections that transform acceptable into slightly better than acceptable. The bronze fibula catches the light, simple and honest, not trying to be more than it is. The equestrian stripe runs along the edge of the sinus, visible but not prominent, marking your class without demanding attention to it. The overall effect is, you decide exactly what a man should wear to a casual gathering of friends, respectful of tradition without being enslaved by it, comfortable in his own skin even when that skin is wrapped in 7 pounds of wool. You turn away from the mirror and walk toward the door, feeling the toga move with you, settling into its final configuration with each step. The fabric shifts and adjusts, finding the places where it wants to rest, and by the time you reach the atrium you've almost forgotten you're wearing it. Almost. Some part of your mind remains aware of the garment at all times, monitoring its position, noting any shift that might require correction. But that awareness is fading, replaced by anticipation of the picnic itself, of seeing your friends, of eating good food in good company, of spending an afternoon doing nothing more demanding than being present and enjoying yourself. The toga will be there, of course, wrapped around you for the duration, but it will gradually become background, a constant rather than a focus, the frame through which you experience the event rather than the event itself. You stand before the small chest where you keep your accessories, the lid propped open to reveal the accumulated metal and stone of a lifetime's acquisitions. The toga sits heavily on your shoulders, already beginning to find its natural resting places, and you're acutely aware that every additional item you add to your person represents another opportunity for judgment, another detail for someone to notice and evaluate. The Romans have perfected the art of reading meaning into small things, the width of a stripe, the material of a pin, the number of rings on a hand, and you're about to submit yourself to that reading with the same mixture of resignation and hope that accompanies any public appearance. Your fingers hover over the collection, touching nothing, just feeling the weight of possibility. The bronze fibula is already in place at your shoulder, simple and functional, and you're comfortable with that choice. But the question of additional ornamentation remains, and it's more complicated than you'd like. Roman men don't wear much jewelry by modern standards. No necklaces, no bracelets, nothing that might be mistaken for Eastern decadence. But rings are acceptable, and fibulae are necessary, and the combination of these small items can shift the entire message of your appearance. You reach into the chest and lift out the signet ring, turning it in the light, watching the engraved design catch and release shadows. This ring has been in your family for 3 generations, passed from father to son along with the stories of the men who wore it. Your grandfather used it to seal documents related to his military service, marking orders that sent men to their deaths. Your father used it to authenticate business dealings that built the family's modest fortune. You use it mostly to feel connected to them, to carry their presence into situations where you might otherwise feel alone. But wearing it to a picnic feels different from wearing it to formal occasions. The signet ring is official, public, tied to your identity as a property owner and citizen with legal standing. Bringing it to a casual gathering feels like bringing your will to a dinner party, technically permissible, but suggesting an inability to separate different aspects of your life. You set it back in the chest and continue searching, your fingers pushing aside rings you rarely wear, fibulae you've inherited and never used, small tokens from travels that seemed meaningful at the time and now seem merely sentimental. There's a ring from Corinth, bronze set with a carved stone showing a scene from the Iliad, that you bought from a merchant who swore it had belonged to a Greek scholar. You wore it for a few months after returning from Greece, enjoying the way it caught light and conversation, until someone at a gathering mentioned that such rings were commonly worn by freedmen trying to appear more cultured than they were. You stopped wearing it the next day, and it's been in this chest ever since, a reminder that even innocent choices can carry meanings you never intended. You close the chest without selecting anything additional, deciding that the bronze fibula is enough, that adding more would tip the balance from simple to cluttered. But the decision doesn't feel final, and you find yourself opening the chest again, pulling out a small leather pouch that contains your mother's gift. A ring that belonged to her father, too small for your fingers but too precious to discard. You've never worn it, can't wear it without cutting off circulation, but you keep it close because keeping it feels like keeping her close. Your mother has been gone for 7 years now, and the grief has softened into something almost comfortable, but holding the ring still brings her presence into the room. You can almost hear her voice, the way she used to comment on your appearance before you left the house, adjusting your toga with the same careful attention she brought to everything. Presentable, she would say, standing back to assess her work, but not trying too hard. That's the key. You smile at the memory, then close the pouch and return it to the chest. The mirror shows a man in a toga, accessorized with exactly one fibula, standing in a room full of options he's chosen not to take. It's a statement in itself, this minimalism, and you hope it reads as confident rather than impoverished. The line between simplicity and poverty is thin in Rome, crossed more easily than you'd like, and you're aware that your choices will be interpreted through lenses you can't control. Someone at the picnic might see your single bronze fibula and think practical, unpretentious. Someone else might see the same fibula and think can't afford better. The same object, the same man, the same afternoon. Two completely different readings, both possible, both outside your control. This is the fundamental terror of social appearance. You can only control what you present, not how it's received. You turn your attention to your shoes, the calcii you selected earlier, and bend to adjust the straps. The leather is good quality, not the best but far from the worst, and the soles show the slight wear that comes from regular use. You consider, briefly, whether you should have chosen newer shoes, ones without the scuffs and creases that mark them as everyday wear. But new shoes would draw attention, would suggest that you'd specifically prepared for this occasion, would undermine the carefully constructed illusion that you simply threw on your toga and walked out the door without thinking. The scuffed shoes are better, you decide. They say, I wear these often, because I go places and do things, and I don't obsess over minor imperfections. They say, I'm comfortable enough in my identity that I don't need pristine accessories. They say all these things, you hope, without saying them aloud. The belt is next, and here you second-guess yourself again. The simple leather belt with its bronze buckle lies on the bed where you left it, waiting to be fastened around your waist. But next to it sits the decorated belt, the one with silver studs, and the contrast between them feels suddenly significant. The simple belt says, I am what I am, take it or leave it. The decorated belt says, I have resources, and I'm not afraid to show them. Which message is right for a picnic? Which message will Lucius and the other guests receive as appropriate? You pick up the decorated belt, feel its weight, run your thumb across the silver studs. They're cool to the touch, smooth, obviously high-quality work. Your father gave you this belt when you came of age, and you've worn it perhaps a dozen times, always on occasions that felt important enough to warrant its presence. A picnic, you realize, is not such an occasion. You set the decorated belt aside and fasten the simple one around your waist, feeling the leather settle against the linen of your tunic, completing the foundation on which everything else rests. But the accessories aren't limited to what you wear, they also include what you carry. The picnic will require you to bring something, some contribution to the communal meal, and the container you choose will be as visible as anything else you wear. You walk to the kitchen area where your slaves have assembled the offerings you'll present. A basket of figs, a small amphora of wine from your family's modest vineyard, some cheese wrapped in leaves, bread still warm from the oven. The food itself is appropriate, generous without being excessive, the kind of contribution that says I'm glad to be here without shouting look at what I can afford. But the basket is another question entirely. Your everyday basket is wicker, functional, slightly worn, the kind of container that slaves used to carry goods from market. Using it would be practical, honest, unpretentious. But it would also be, potentially, too casual, suggesting that you're treating the picnic as a simple errand rather than a social occasion. Your formal basket is silver, a gift from a client years ago, beautiful and impractical and far too fancy for carrying figs and cheese. Using it would be ridiculous, would mark you as someone who doesn't understand the difference between a religious festival and an afternoon with friends. You need something between these extremes, something that says I made an effort without saying I made too much effort. Your slaves, anticipating this dilemma, have placed a third option beside the others. A basket of medium formality, woven from good materials but not precious, large enough to carry your offerings but not so large that it draws attention to itself. You pick it up, examine it, appreciate the careful construction and the subtle pattern woven into the sides. It's perfect, or as close to perfect as such things get, and you realize that your slaves have managed this situation better than you have. They've assessed the requirements, understood the social calculus, and prepared accordingly while you've been standing in your dressing room agonizing over rings. You're grateful for their competence and slightly embarrassed by your own need for it, but gratitude wins out over embarrassment as you begin arranging the food in the basket. The figs go in first, nestled in a cloth to keep them from bruising. The cheese follows, wrapped in its leaves, placed where it won't be crushed. The bread sits on top, still warm, filling the basket with a smell that makes you suddenly hungry. The amphora of wine you'll carry separately, slung over your shoulder on a leather strap, too heavy to include with the lighter items. You step back and survey your work, the basket and its contents representing hours of preparation compressed into a single visual moment. This is what you'll bring to Lucius's picnic, this collection of food and this carefully chosen container, and like everything else about your appearance, it will be judged. You lift the basket, test its weight, adjust the arrangement of items inside. The bread shifts slightly, and you reposition it, wanting everything to look intentional rather than accidental. The figs gleam darkly in the afternoon light, their skins almost purple, almost the color of the senatorial stripe you don't wear. The cheese exudes a faint aroma that mingles with the bread's warmth, creating a smell that promises good eating and good company. You're ready, you decide. You're as ready as you'll ever be. The toga sits correctly on your shoulders, the fibula holds it in place, the belt cinches at your waist, the shoes support your feet, the basket hangs from your hand. All that remains is the journey itself, the walk through the streets of Rome to the Campus Martius, where your friends await and where the afternoon's judgments will finally be delivered. You step through your front door and into the Roman afternoon, and the sun immediately begins its assault on your carefully constructed dignity. The light hits your toga with the force of an accusation, illuminating every fold and wrinkle you'd hoped would pass unnoticed. The wool, which felt merely warm in the relative cool of your dressing room, now announces itself as the thermal disaster you've always known it to be. You've been outside for approximately 10 seconds, and already you can feel the first prickle of sweat forming along your spine, that telltale moisture that will eventually transform your respectable garment into a damp and clinging second skin. The basket of food hangs from your left hand, the amphora of wine bumps against your right hip, and you begin the long walk toward the Campus Martius with the grim determination of a general marching towards certain defeat. The streets of Rome are never empty, and they're certainly not empty now, in the late afternoon when everyone seems to be moving in directions that inconveniently intersect with your own. You navigate through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who's spent his life in this city, stepping around merchants hawking their wares, avoiding the streams of waste that flow from upper windows, nodding to acquaintances whose names you've forgotten but whose faces suggest some prior connection. The toga, you notice, changes how people interact with you. Slaves step aside more quickly, their eyes downcast. Fellow citizens nod with varying degrees of recognition, some stopping to exchange brief greetings that you accept with the patience of someone who has nowhere to be but knows he should appear to be in a hurry. The equestrian stripe on your toga does its work silently, marking your status without requiring you to announce it, and you're grateful for the invisible armor it provides even as you curse the warmth it traps. But the armor has weaknesses, and you're discovering them with every block you walk. The sun beats down on your left shoulder, where the toga folds are thickest, and you can feel the heat building beneath the wool like a slow fire. Your right arm, by contrast, is relatively exposed, the fabric draped in such a way that the breeze can reach your skin, creating a strange asymmetry of temperature that mirrors the asymmetry of the garment itself. You shift the amphora to your other shoulder, trying to distribute the weight more evenly, and the movement causes the toga to shift slightly, not enough to require adjustment, but enough to remind you that the whole construction is held together by friction and hope. One wrong move, one stumble on the uneven cobblestones, and your afternoon could end before it properly begins, with you sprawled in the street surrounded by spilled wine and scattered figs and the amused stares of everyone within viewing distance. You walk more carefully after that thought, placing each foot with exaggerated attention, scanning the ground ahead for obstacles that might trip you. The Romans build excellent roads, you'll grant them that, even in your current state of mild suffering. But the streets of the city are another matter entirely. They're crowded, uneven, frequently slick with substances you prefer not to identify, and navigating them in 7 pounds of wool requires the concentration of a tightrope walker. You watch a slave girl dodge through the crowd with effortless grace, her simple tunic allowing movement that your toga makes impossible, and you feel a flash of envy so sharp it surprises you. She can run if she needs to, can jump and turn and twist without her clothing fighting her at every move. You, by contrast, are essentially wearing a portable prison, a garment designed to restrict motion as much as to signify status, and the irony is not lost on you that the clothing of freedom actually limits your freedom more than any slave's tunic ever could. The envy passes, replaced by the familiar acceptance of your situation. You chose this, in a sense. Not this specific walk on this specific afternoon, but the life that makes this walk necessary, the life of a Roman citizen, with all its privileges and all its ridiculous clothing requirements. You could have been born a slave, or a foreigner, or any of the other categories of humanity that fill these streets without togas and without the anxieties that togas bring. But you weren't, and here you are, and the toga is the price you pay for the identity you've inherited. It's not a fair price, perhaps, but fairness has never been Rome's guiding principle. You pass the forum, and the sight of the great public space pulls your attention away from your immediate discomfort. The forum is busy, as always, filled with men conducting business, making speeches, negotiating deals, performing all the rituals of Roman public life. And almost all of them are wearing togas. You see them in every variation. Bright white candidates' togas, dignified senatorial togas with their broad purple stripes, simple everyday togas like your own, even a few that look like they've seen better decades. They're all suffering, you realize. They're all hot and uncomfortable and slightly awkward in their woolen embrace, and they're all pretending not to notice, just as you're pretending not to notice. The shared pretense is what holds everything together, the collective agreement that this absurd garment is normal and natural and worth the discomfort it causes. You're not alone in your suffering, and somehow that makes it easier to bear. A group of children runs past, chasing a ball, their tunics flapping behind them like small flags of freedom. One of them glances at you, then says something to his companions that you can't hear but can easily imagine. They're laughing, probably, at the sight of a grown man wrapped in wool on a warm afternoon, and you can't blame them. From their perspective, you must look ridiculous, a moving mountain of fabric, constrained and cautious, unable to join their game or even move with anything approaching speed. You were one of those children once, running through these same streets, and you remember how the toga-clad adults looked to you, ancient, slow, belonging to a different world entirely. Now you're one of them, and the children run past you just as you ran past your elders, and the cycle continues. The sun continues its slow arc toward the horizon, and the quality of light begins to shift, softening from harsh brightness to something almost golden. You've been walking for what feels like hours, though you know it's only been 20 minutes or so. The Campus Martius is still ahead, visible now as a green expanse beyond the built-up areas, and the sight of all that open space gives you a small surge of energy. You'll be there soon, among friends, with food and wine and the gradual relaxation that comes from good company. The toga will still be there, of course, wrapped around you for the duration, but on the grass of the campus it might feel different. Less like a costume, more like a blanket, something to recline on rather than something to be constrained by. But first you have to cross one more busy intersection, and this one presents a challenge. A cart has broken down, its wheel wedged between two cobblestones, and the resulting traffic jam has created chaos that extends in all directions. Pedestrians weave between stalled vehicles, their tempers fraying in the afternoon heat. Merchants shout at each other, blaming everyone but themselves for the delay. And you stand at the edge of this chaos, holding your basket and your amphora, trying to calculate the safest path through the madness. The toga feels heavier than ever, more restrictive, more of a liability. If you fall here, in this crowd, you might not be able to get up again without assistance. If your toga comes unwrapped here, in full view of dozens of strangers, you'll have to reconstruct it on the spot, a performance you're not sure you're capable of delivering. You wait, letting the chaos settle, watching for an opening. A gap appears between two arguing merchants, and you step into it, moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying more than just food and wine. You're carrying your reputation, your identity, your place in the social order, all wrapped in wool and balanced on your shoulders. One wrong step could send it all tumbling into the mud. But you don't take that wrong step. You navigate through the crowd with the same patience you've been cultivating all afternoon, and gradually the chaos falls behind you, replaced by the relative calm of the approaching green space. The Campus Martius opens before you like a promise. You can see the clusters of people scattered across the grass, the blankets spread beneath them, the slaves moving among them with trays and amphorae. Somewhere in that scattering is Lucius's gathering, your destination, the reason you've spent the past several hours in a state of low-grade anxiety. You pause at the edge of the open space, letting your eyes adjust, scanning for familiar faces. The toga settles around you, warm and heavy and somehow comforting now that the end of your journey is in sight. The sun continues its slow descent, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. You take a deep breath, adjust your grip on the basket, and step onto the grass. The grass of the Campus Martius is softer than you expected, yielding slightly beneath your feet as you walk toward the scattered clusters of picnickers. You're scanning the scene with the intensity of a scout approaching enemy territory, your eyes moving from group to group, assessing, categorizing, searching for the specific combination of faces and blankets that will tell you you've arrived. The afternoon light has shifted into that golden hour that painters try and fail to capture, and everything, the grass, the people, the distant curve of the Tiber, seems to glow with a warmth that feels almost welcoming. Almost. Because beneath that golden surface runs an undercurrent of assessment, of judgment, of the silent calculation that every Roman makes when encountering every other Roman in a social setting. You're doing it yourself, even now, even before you found your friends. You're looking at the other picnickers and noting their clothing, their posture, the way they've arranged themselves on their blankets, and you're drawing conclusions from these observations that you'd never state aloud. To your left, a group of young men has spread an enormous blanket and arranged themselves in a circle that suggests they're either very comfortable with each other or very determined to appear that way. Their togas are uniformly bright, aggressively white, the kind of garments that men wear when they're still establishing their identities and want everyone to know they've arrived. You recognize the style. It's the current fashion, executed with the excessive precision of those who've learned the rules recently and haven't yet learned when to break them. The sinus on one of them is so perfectly curved it looks like it was sculpted rather than draped, and you wonder how long he spent in front of his mirror this afternoon.
An hour? 2? Longer.
The thought is both judgmental and sympathetic, because you know exactly what drove him to that level of effort. He's young, still proving himself, still believing that perfection is possible and that achieving it will somehow protect him from social judgment. You were that young once, and you remember the exhaustion of caring that much. To your right, an older man reclines alone on a smaller blanket, his toga draped in a style that you recognize as deliberately old-fashioned. The sinus is deeper than current fashion dictates, the umbo gathered higher, the overall effect one of someone who has either lost track of changing styles or decided that changing styles don't apply to him. You suspect the latter, because there's a confidence in his posture that suggests he knows exactly what he's doing. He's making a statement, this man, whether anyone else reads it that way or not. He's saying that he's been a Roman citizen long enough to remember when togas were togas, and that the current fashion is for people who care too much about what others think. You admire him, briefly, for his willingness to stand apart. But you also note that he's alone, and you wonder if his independence has cost him the easy companionship that the younger men seem to share. Ahead of you, finally, you spot familiar faces. Lucius is there, rising from a blanket to wave you over, and the sight of his welcoming gesture releases some of the tension you've been carrying since you left your house. You quicken your pace slightly, the basket swinging from your hand, the amphora bumping against your hip, and as you approach you begin the inevitable process of reading the room, or reading the blanket, in this case. Lucius is wearing a toga that strikes exactly the note you were aiming for. Clean, respectable, neither aggressively fashionable nor defiantly old-fashioned. His sinus drapes with the ease of long practice, and you note with relief that his garment is no more perfect than your own. There's a slight asymmetry at his left shoulder that you recognize as the mark of someone who dressed himself without obsessive adjustment, and the sight of it makes you feel suddenly, profoundly grateful. Around him, the other guests are arranging themselves on the blanket, and you take them in with quick, assessing glances. There's Gaius, not the unfortunate Gaius from last year's fashion disaster, but a different Gaius, a friend of Lucius's from childhood, wearing a toga that's slightly too long, the laceania pooling on the grass in a way that will surely collect grass stains and dirt by evening's end. He doesn't seem to notice or care, which is either genuine indifference or masterful performance. Next to him reclines Marcus, and you feel a small shock of recognition. This is the Marcus of the too short toga, the cousin whose fashion misstep at Saturnalia became the subject of so much whispered commentary. He's here, at this picnic, wearing a toga that appears perfectly appropriate, and you wonder if he's aware that people still talk about that other garment. Probably, you decide. Probably he's aware, and probably he's spent the months since then ensuring that nothing similar ever happens again. The toga he wears today is almost aggressively correct, as if he's overcompensating for past error, and you feel a pang of sympathy for the weight of that self-awareness. There are others you don't recognize, friends of Lucius from different circles, and you catalogue them as you approach. A young woman, Lucius's cousin, you think, visiting from the countryside, wears a stola that marks her as respectable and married, the garment falling in soft folds that suggest she dressed without the anxiety that seems to plague the men. You envy her, briefly, for the relative simplicity of women's fashion, then remind yourself that women face their own clothing anxieties, just different ones. Her stola is probably the subject of as much internal debate as your toga, and she's probably scanning the other women right now, comparing, assessing, drawing silent conclusions about where she fits in this gathering. You reach the blanket and Lucius clasps your arm in welcome, his grip warm and genuine. "You made it," he says, and the simple words carry more relief than you'd expected. He was worried. You realize. He was worried that people wouldn't come, that his picnic would be sparsely attended, that the effort he's put into hosting would go unrewarded. The thought is oddly comforting. Even hosts experience social anxiety. Even the people who seem most confident spend their own hours of doubt and uncertainty. You're all in this together, all performing, all hoping that the performance will be received as genuine. You lower yourself onto the blanket with the careful grace of someone wearing 7 pounds of wool, arranging the toga around you as you settle. The fabric shifts and adjusts, finding new folds, new configurations, and you feel the grass beneath you through the thin barrier of the blanket. It's slightly damp, slightly cool, a welcome contrast to the warmth of the afternoon. You set down the basket of food and the amphora of wine, and Lucius's eyes light up at the sight of the latter. "From your family's vineyard?" he asks, and you nod, pleased that he remembers. The wine is not the best in Rome, but it's yours, grown on land your father worked and his father before him, and bringing it to a gathering feels like bringing a piece of your history to share. The other guests shift to make room for you, and you find yourself between Marcus and the young woman, Lucius's cousin, whose name you learn is Livia. She smiles, introduces herself, and you return the introduction with the formal politeness that Roman manners require. Her eyes flick briefly to your toga, taking in the equestrian stripe, the drape, the general impression, and you know she's forming an assessment that she'll never share. You do the same, noting the quality of her stola, the way her hair is arranged, the small fibula at her shoulder that matches yours in its simplicity. The assessment is mutual, silent, and entirely normal. This is how Romans meet, how they place each other in the complex web of status and connection that defines social life. You could no more avoid it than you could avoid breathing. Lucius begins pouring wine, passing cups around the circle, and the conversation settles into the easy rhythm of old friends and new acquaintances finding common ground. Someone comments on the weather, perfect for a picnic, warm but not too warm, and you silently disagree, feeling the weight of your toga and the warmth it traps. But you nod along, because disagreeing would require explaining why you disagree, and that would require admitting that you're uncomfortable, and admitting discomfort is not something Romans do in social settings. You're all pretending to be comfortable, just as you're all pretending that your togas are natural and easy and exactly what you choose to wear on a warm afternoon. The pretense holds, as it always does, and the conversation flows around it like water around stones. The wine has been poured, the introductions completed, and now you face the true test of Roman social prowess, eating while wearing a toga. The basket you brought has been opened, its contents arranged on a large platter that someone produced from somewhere, and the figs gleam darkly in the fading light alongside cheeses and bread and olives and small pastries stuffed with something that smells like honey and nuts. It's a feast, really, the kind of spread that would be impressive indoors and feels almost extravagant here on the grass. But the feast presents a challenge that you hadn't fully considered during your hours of wardrobe anxiety. How, exactly, does one recline gracefully and eat with dignity while wrapped in 7 pounds of wool that has strong opinions about our movement? You watch the others for clues, pretending to be absorbed in the conversation while actually studying their techniques. Lucius has positioned himself on his left side, his right arm free to reach for food, his toga arranged in such a way that the bulk of the fabric lies behind him rather than under him. It's a good position, you note, one that keeps the most vulnerable parts of the garment away from the food while still allowing access to the platter. Marcus has adopted a similar pose, though his toga seems to be fighting him more actively. Every time he reaches for something, the fabric shifts at his shoulder, and he has to resist the urge to adjust it constantly. You recognize that struggle, have lived it many times, and you offer him a small nod of solidarity that he returns with a grateful glance. Livia, the cousin, has no such problems. Her stola, designed for movement and comfort, allows her to reach and stretch and shift position without any of the anxiety that plagues the men. She's already helped herself to several figs and a piece of cheese, eating with the easy grace of someone who isn't constantly aware of her clothing's potential for betrayal. You envy her, briefly, then turn your attention to your own approach. You lower yourself onto your left side, using your left arm to support your weight, and extend your right hand toward the platter. The movement pulls slightly at the toga's drape, but nothing shifts catastrophically. Your fingers close around a fig, plump and soft, and you bring it to your lips with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. The fig enters your mouth, you bite down, and the sweetness floods across your tongue in a wave of honeyed pleasure. Success! You've eaten one thing without disaster. The afternoon feels suddenly brighter. But the fig was easy. It's small, self-contained, requires no dipping or spreading or complex manipulation. The bread will be harder, requiring you to tear it with your hands, and the cheese will leave crumbs, and the pastries are filled with honey that will absolutely find its way onto your toga if you're not vigilant. You survey the platter like a general assessing a battlefield, identifying the threats and planning your approach. The figs are safe. You've established that. The olives are probably safe too, as long as you're careful with the pits. The bread is medium risk, manageable if you tear small pieces rather than going for a full chunk. The pastries are high risk, delicious but treacherous, and you decide to save them for later, when you've had more wine and care slightly less about appearances. You reach for an olive, pop it into your mouth, and work the flesh from the pit with the practiced efficiency of someone who's been eating olives since childhood. The pit you deposit into your cupped palm, then look around for somewhere to put it. There's no small dish for discarded pits, no convenient container, just the grass and the blanket and the other guests who are presumably dealing with the same problem. You see Marcus drop his pit onto the grass beside the blanket, and after a moment's hesitation, you do the same. It feels wrong, somehow, littering this carefully arranged picnic space, but you remind yourself that you're on grass, that the pits will decompose, that this is what people do at outdoor gatherings. The Romans haven't invented portable waste disposal yet, and you're not going to be the one to pioneer it while wearing your best everyday toga. The conversation continues around you, fragments of talk about politics and prices and the latest scandal involving someone's cousin and someone else's slave. You half listen, half focus on the ongoing challenge of eating without incident, and you notice that you're not alone in this divided attention. Everyone on the blanket is performing the same careful dance, reaching for food with controlled movements, chewing with exaggerated caution, surreptitiously checking their togas for crumbs and stains. The shared vigilance creates a strange intimacy, a silent acknowledgement that you're all in this together, all struggling with the same fundamental incompatibility between formal wear and casual dining. No one mentions it, of course. That would break the pretense that togas are perfectly suitable for all occasions. But the awareness hangs in the air like the scent of honey from those treacherous pastries. You risk a piece of bread, tearing off a small chunk and dipping it in the olive oil that someone has produced from a small flask. The oil glistens on the bread, tempting and dangerous, and you bring it to your mouth with the concentration of a surgeon performing a delicate procedure. The bread is good, fresh, and chewy, and the oil adds a richness that makes you close your eyes briefly in appreciation. When you open them, you catch Livia watching you with an expression that might be amusement. She looks away quickly, but not quickly enough. You've been caught in your intense focus, and you feel a flush of embarrassment that has nothing to do with the wine. She's seen you treating eating like a military operation, and she's found it funny. And you can't really blame her because it is funny, in a way. You're a grown man, a Roman citizen, and you're approaching a piece of bread like it might attack you. The wine helps. It always does. Lucius keeps the cups filled, and with each pour you feel your shoulders relaxing slightly, your vigilance softening around the edges. The toga still sits on your shoulders, still requires occasional adjustments, but it feels less like an enemy and more like a companion. An annoying companion, maybe, one that complains constantly and demands attention, but a companion nonetheless. You reach for a pastry, the high-risk item you've been avoiding, and bite into it with something approaching confidence. The honey filling escapes slightly, running down your chin, and you catch it with a finger before it can drip onto your chest. Livia laughs, openly this time, and you laugh too, because what else can you do? The honey is on your finger, not your toga, and the crisis has been averted through quick thinking and faster reflexes. You're a hero of picnic dining, and no one can take that from you. The conversation shifts to something more engaging, a debate about the best way to prepare dormice, of all things. And you find yourself drawn in, offering opinions, hearing others, participating in the easy exchange that defines good company. The food continues to circulate, the wine continues to flow, and the afternoon settles into the kind of comfortable rhythm that makes all the earlier anxiety seem ridiculous. You were worried about this? You spent hours agonizing over clothing choices, and now you're lying on a blanket in the campus Martius, eating honey pastries and arguing about dormice with people who've become friends over the course of an afternoon. The toga is still there, still warm, still occasionally requiring adjustment, but it's become background, a constant rather than a focus. You've stopped checking it constantly, stopped measuring every movement against its requirements. You're just here, now, present in a way you haven't been all day. Marcus leans over and mutters something about the cheese, and you lean in to hear him, and the movement shifts your toga in a way that requires a small adjustment. You make it automatically, without thinking, and Marcus nods in understanding. He's been adjusting his own toga all afternoon, fighting the same battle, and the shared struggle creates a bond that words couldn't quite capture. You're both Romans, both citizens, both wrapped in wool and trying to enjoy a picnic, and somehow that shared absurdity matters more than any of the status markers you spent the morning worrying about. The equestrian stripe on your toga, the narrow purple that costs so much and signifies so little in this context. It's just decoration now, just color, just one more detail in an afternoon full of details. The sun continues its slow descent, and the light shifts from gold to amber to something almost rose-tinted. The campus Martius glows around you, and the other picnickers fade into soft focus, their conversations blending into a pleasant murmur. You're comfortable. You realize. Actually comfortable. Not just pretending. The toga has settled into place, finding the positions it wants to occupy, and your body has adjusted to its presence. The grass is soft beneath the blanket, the wine is warm in your cup, and the people around you are good company. This is what you were anxious about? This easy afternoon, this simple pleasure, this moment of connection that required nothing more than showing up and being present? The anxiety seems distant now, almost silly, but you know it will return. Tomorrow, probably, when you're back in your atrium, staring at another invitation, feeling the familiar dread settle over you like a toga you can't quite adjust. But that's tomorrow. Today, you're here, and here is enough. The conversation has settled into that comfortable lull that follows good food and plentiful wine, when someone, you think it might be Gaius, though you're not entirely sure, mentions the incident. It comes up casually, the way these things always do, as if everyone involved has been waiting for the right moment to introduce it into the flow of talk. Remember, he says, gesturing vaguely toward a distant corner of the campus Martius where another group of picnickers has gathered. Remember that guy who showed up last year in the Etruscan mantle? The question hangs in the air for a moment, and then the laughter starts. Not mean-spirited laughter, exactly, but the kind of shared amusement that bonds people through the recognition of mutual absurdity. You do remember, actually. You remember it quite clearly, even though you weren't at that particular gathering. The story spread through Roman social circles with the speed of fire through dry grass, carried by slaves and merchants and anyone else who'd witnessed the fashion disaster or heard about it from someone who had. A man, his name has been lost to history, or at least to your memory, had arrived at a picnic wearing what he clearly believed was an acceptable alternative to the toga. It was Etruscan in style, a mantle wrapped differently from the Roman garment, and it marked him immediately as either a foreigner, or eccentric, or someone who'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. The whispers started before he'd even found a place on the blankets, and by the time he left, the story was already spreading beyond the immediate gathering, taking on details and embellishments with each retelling. Now, a year later, the Etruscan mantle has become shorthand for fashion disaster, the kind of reference that needs no explanation among those who've heard the tale. Someone mentions it, and everyone nods, and the laughter ripples through the group like a shared secret. You find yourself laughing too, even though you feel slightly guilty about it. You don't know the man, have never met him, but you imagine how he must have felt when he realized what he'd done. The slow dawning awareness that something was wrong, the sideways glances that didn't quite meet his eyes, the too polite questions about where he'd acquired such an interesting garment. You've been there, in your own way, not with an Etruscan mantle but with the too short toga that still follows Marcus around like a shadow. You know what it feels like to be the subject of the story rather than one of the storytellers. But knowing doesn't stop you from participating, and soon the conversation has spiraled into a full-blown discussion of picnic attire disasters, past and present. Someone remembers a man who wore his toga so aggressively starched that it crackled when he moved, drawing attention with every step. Someone else recalls a woman whose stola was so elaborately arranged that she couldn't recline comfortably and spent the entire afternoon sitting stiffly upright like a statue at a banquet. The stories multiply, each one building on the last, and you realize that everyone here has a collection of fashion observations, a mental catalogue of what not to wear and who wore it anyway. The catalogue serves a purpose. You understand. It helps define the boundaries of acceptable attire by providing examples of what lies beyond them. Every story of disaster reinforces the rules, reminds everyone what happens when the rules are broken, and makes everyone slightly more anxious about their own choices. Lucius, the host, listens to the stories with the expression of a man who's heard them all before but still finds them entertaining. He's a good host, you realize. He's let the conversation flow naturally, hasn't tried to direct it or control it, has simply provided the space for people to talk and laugh and bond over shared experiences. When there's a lull, he fills it with another story, this one about a relative of his who showed up to a formal dinner in a toga that was clearly his father's, too large and draped incorrectly, the sleeves hanging past his hands like the wings of some unfortunate bird. The image is so vivid, so specific, that everyone laughs again, and you feel the tension that's been building since the Etruscan mantle story began to ease slightly. These stories aren't just about judgment, you realize. They're also about connection, about the recognition that everyone makes mistakes, that no one navigates Roman social life with perfect grace. But even as you relax, you're aware of a new anxiety taking root. If people are telling stories about past fashion disasters, what stories will they tell about this gathering? What details will they remember, embellish, repeat to friends who weren't here? You scan the group, trying to see yourself through their eyes, to identify any potential story-worthy elements in your own appearance or behavior. The toga is holding up reasonably well, despite hours of wear and the challenges of picnic dining. The sinus has shifted slightly, but not disastrously. The umber remains gathered at your waist, doing its job. The bronze fibula still secures everything at your shoulder. You check for food stains, crumbs, any evidence of the honey pastry that nearly escaped earlier. Nothing visible. You're safe, you think. You're not going to be the subject of next year's stories. Marcus, sitting beside you, seems to be conducting a similar self-assessment. His toga, you notice, has developed a small wrinkle at the left shoulder that wasn't there earlier, and he keeps touching it surreptitiously, trying to smooth it without drawing attention. You want to tell him that it's fine, that no one notices, that the wrinkle is barely visible and certainly not story-worthy. But telling him would require acknowledging that you've noticed, which would make him more self-conscious, which would defeat the purpose entirely. So you say nothing. Just offer another small nod of solidarity that he returns before turning back to the conversation. The discussion has shifted now. moving from specific disasters to broader questions of fashion and identity. Someone asks whether the toga is really necessary, whether all this anxiety about clothing serves any purpose beyond making everyone miserable. The question is rhetorical. Mostly, everyone knows the toga is necessary, that Roman identity depends on it in ways that can't be easily explained, but it opens a space for reflection that the group seems eager to fill. Lucius offers a theory. The toga matters because it's difficult, because it requires effort and attention, because wearing it properly demonstrates that you care about the things Romans are supposed to care about. The difficulty is the point, he suggests. If the toga were easy to wear, anyone could do it, and it wouldn't mean anything. You nod along with this theory, even though you're not entirely convinced. It feels too convenient, too much like rationalizing a system that's grown more complex than anyone intended. But you've heard variations of this argument before, from your father and his friends, from men who've spent their lives in togas and can't imagine an alternative. The toga is Roman, and Roman is good, and anything that makes being Roman harder must therefore be good as well. It's circular logic, but circular logic has powered Rome for centuries, and you're not going to be the one to question it now, at a picnic, surrounded by friends who've just spent an hour sharing stories about people who questioned it in more visible ways. Livia, who's been quiet for a while, speaks up with an observation that cuts through the theorizing. You men, she says, worry so much about your clothing. We women have our own concerns, but at least we can move in our garments. There's laughter at this, partly because it's true and partly because she said aloud what everyone's been thinking but no one would admit. You look at her stola, so simple and practical compared to your toga, and you feel that flash of envy again. She can eat without fear, recline without adjustment, participate in the picnic without constant awareness of what her clothing is doing. You wonder what it would be like to move through the world like that, to wear your identity without it wearing you. But even as you wonder, you know you'll never find out. You're Roman, and Romans wear togas, and the anxiety that comes with them is just part of what it means to belong. The Etruscan mantle guy learned that lesson the hard way, and his story will be told for years, a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can opt out of the system. You're not going to be that guy. You're going to keep wearing your toga, keep adjusting it, keep worrying about it, keep participating in the shared absurdity that binds you to every other Roman man on this blanket and every other Roman man who's ever struggled with 7 pounds of wool on a warm afternoon. It's not comfortable, and it's not rational, and it's definitely not easy. But it's Roman, and for now, that's enough. The sun has begun its final descent toward the horizon, and with it, your toga has begun its slow and inexorable unraveling. You first noticed it about an hour ago, a subtle shift at the shoulder that you corrected with a small adjustment. Then another shift, this time at the waist, where the umbo seemed to be migrating slowly southward despite your best efforts to keep it in place. Now, as the light turns gold and amber and the shadows stretch long across the grass, you're engaged in a constant battle against entropy, fighting to maintain a dignity that feels increasingly fictional with each passing moment. The toga, which this morning seemed like a manageable challenge, has revealed itself as the enemy it always was, patiently waiting for the moment when your vigilance would flag and it could finally achieve its true form, a puddle of wool around your feet. You're not alone in this struggle. Look around the blanket and you'll see every man engaged in the same quiet war, each fighting his own battle against his own garment. Marcus has given up on subtlety entirely, openly adjusting his toga every few minutes with the resigned expression of someone who's accepted defeat but refuses to surrender. Lucius, the host, maintains a veneer of calm that you suspect conceals frantic internal calculations about how much longer he can maintain his position before the whole construction collapses. Even Gaius, who seemed so relaxed earlier, is now making small, desperate adjustments that he hopes no one notices. The women watch with expressions that mix amusement and sympathy, their stolas remaining perfectly arranged without any apparent effort, and you hate them a little for their easy comfort even as you appreciate the solidarity they offer. The heat hasn't helped. The afternoon sun, which felt merely warm when you arrived, has baked the wool against your skin until you're not sure where the garment ends and you begin. Sweat has soaked through your tunic in places, creating damp patches that you hope aren't visible through the toga's multiple layers. The wool itself has absorbed moisture, growing heavier and more clingy with each passing hour, and the combination of weight and warmth has left you feeling like you're wearing a blanket that's slowly being saturated with warm water. You remember, vaguely, that wool is supposed to be breathable, that shepherds have worn it for millennia in all kinds of climates, but right now that feels like theoretical knowledge with no connection to your lived experience. Right now, you're just hot and tired and fighting a losing battle against a garment that doesn't care about your suffering. The conversation has softened with the light, moving from lively debate to comfortable murmurs. People speak in lower voices, laugh more quietly, let longer pauses stretch between exchanges. The wine continues to flow, but more slowly now, as if everyone's agreed without discussion that the afternoon is winding down and it's time to ease into the evening rather than pushing toward more intensity. You're grateful for the slowdown, because it means fewer demands on your attention, less need to be present and engaged while also fighting your toga. You can sit back, carefully, always carefully, and let the conversation wash over you, contributing only when you have something to say, otherwise just listening and watching and being. But even sitting back requires vigilance, because sitting back shifts your weight, and shifting your weight shifts the toga, and shifting the toga requires adjustment, and adjustment draws attention, and drawing attention is exactly what you've been trying to avoid all afternoon. You've developed a technique, over the hours, that minimizes the visibility of your adjustments. You wait for a moment when everyone's looking at someone else, then make your move quickly, one hand reaching for the slipping fold while the other holds the main body in place. The adjustment takes seconds, but those seconds feel like hours, and you're always convinced that someone noticed, that someone saw you struggling, that someone is even now filing away the observation for future reference. No one ever seems to notice, or if they do, they're polite enough to pretend otherwise. But the anxiety remains, a constant companion to the physical discomfort. The physical discomfort itself has become almost familiar, a presence you've learned to live with rather than fight against. The weight of the toga on your left shoulder, the pressure of the umbo against your waist, the drag of the lacinier across your ankles. These sensations have moved from foreground to background, from constant irritants to the white noise of your afternoon. You notice them only when they change, when something shifts and requires attention. The rest of the time, they're just there, part of the experience, no more remarkable than the grass beneath the blanket or the sky above your head. You've adapted, as humans always do, to conditions that would have seemed unbearable this morning. The toga hasn't changed, but you have. You've learned to carry it. Marcus, beside you, has reached a different stage of the struggle. His toga has clearly passed the point of no return, the sinus now hanging at an angle that no amount of adjustment can fix, the umbo completely displaced, the whole garment giving the impression that it's preparing to leave his body entirely. He's stopped fighting it. You notice. He's just sitting there, letting it do what it wants, accepting the inevitable with a calm that you find both admirable and terrifying. If your toga reaches that state, you're not sure you could match his equanimity. You'd probably keep fighting, keep adjusting, keep pretending that everything was fine long after everyone could see that it wasn't. Marcus has chosen a different path, surrendering to fate with the dignity of a general accepting defeat. You're not sure which approach is braver. Livia catches your eye and offers a small smile that seems to acknowledge the struggle without commenting on it directly. She's been watching. You realize. She's been watching all afternoon, noting the small battles and quiet defeats, and she's found something in them that isn't ridicule. Sympathy, maybe, or simply the recognition that men are ridiculous in their own way, just as women are ridiculous in theirs. You return the smile, grateful for the acknowledgement, and turn back to the conversation that continues to flow around you like water around stones. Someone has started telling a story about a trip to the countryside, and you listen with half your attention, the words washing over you without demanding too much engagement. The story involves a pig, somehow, and a farmer who didn't appreciate urban sophistication. And the punchline gets lost in the telling, but everyone laughs anyway because laughter feels better than the alternative. You laugh too, and the movement shifts your toga again, and you make another small adjustment that you hope no one notices. They notice, probably, but they're polite enough to pretend otherwise, and the pretense is enough. The pretense is everything. The light continues its slow fade, and with it goes the heat that's been your companion all afternoon. The air cools slightly, and the wool that felt suffocating now feels almost comfortable, almost protective. You shift position slightly, testing the new temperature, and find that the toga that was your enemy has become something like a friend. Still demanding, still difficult, but warm now in ways that feel almost welcome. The sweat that soaked into the fabric earlier has begun to dry, and the wool no longer clings to your skin with the same desperate intensity. You're not comfortable, exactly, but you're less uncomfortable than you were, and in the context of this afternoon, that feels like victory. Marcus's toga has now reached a state of complete collapse, the fabric pulled around him in a way that suggests he's been attacked by laundry rather than dressed in formal wear. He's stopped pretending otherwise, just sits there in the ruins of his garment with the calm of someone who's passed through embarrassment and come out the other side. You admire him. You realize. You admire his willingness to surrender, to let go of the pretense that any of this matters as much as we pretend it does. The toga is just fabric, after all. The anxiety is just anxiety. The judgments of others, if they come at all, will fade with time, replaced by other judgments, other anxieties, other afternoons spent struggling with wool on warm grass. Marcus has figured this out, somehow, and his calm in the face of fashion disaster feels like wisdom. You're not there yet. Your toga, though compromised, remains recognizably a toga, still draped in something approaching the correct configuration. You'll keep fighting, keep adjusting, keep maintaining the pretense for as long as you can. But you've learned something this afternoon, watching Marcus surrender and survive. The pretense matters, but not as much as you thought. The judgments matter, but they fade. The toga matters, but it's just wool, just fabric, just one more thing that will eventually wear out and be replaced. What matters more, you're starting to understand, is this: the company, the conversation, the shared experience of being human on a warm afternoon with people who've seen you at your worst and haven't looked away. That matters. That might be the only thing that matters. The conversation has meandered into unexpected territory, as conversations will when wine has flowed and friendships have deepened. Someone, you think it might be Gaius, though you're not entirely sure anymore, has raised the question of where the toga actually came from, and suddenly the blanket has become the site of a scholarly debate that no one present is qualified to have. But that doesn't stop anyone from having opinions, because this is Rome, and Romans have opinions about everything, including things they know nothing about. You listen with half your attention, still monitoring your toga's slow deterioration, still making small adjustments when necessary, but the debate pulls at you in ways you didn't expect. The Etruscan theory comes up first, as it always does. Someone recalls hearing that the toga originated with the Etruscans, those mysterious neighbors to the north who gave Rome so much of its early culture and then faded into history like morning fog. The Etruscans, according to this theory, wore a simple wrapped garment that farmers found practical for working in the fields, and the Romans adopted it, adapted it, and transformed it into the complex symbol of citizenship that's currently trying to escape your body. There's something appealing about this theory, something that connects you to the deep past, to the people who worked this land before Rome was Rome. You imagine an Etruscan farmer, thousands of years ago, wrapping himself in wool against the morning chill, and you feel a kinship with him that transcends language and culture and time. He was hot too, Probably. He struggled with his drape too. Probably. He made small adjustments when he thought no one was looking, just like you're doing now. But the Etruscan theory has its critics, and they're well represented on this blanket. Lucius, who's clearly given this some thought, argues that the toga is purely Roman, developed independently from whatever the Etruscans were wearing, and that the similarity is coincidental rather than causal. He cites sources you've never heard of, makes references to archaeological finds that you can't visualize, builds a case that sounds convincing even though you're not sure you believe it. The Etruscans, he argues, had their own garments, their own traditions, their own ways of marking identity through clothing. The Romans borrowed many things from them: religious practices, engineering techniques, probably some recipes. But the toga was Roman from the start, a native invention that grew from native soil. The passion in his voice suggests this matters to him more than you'd expect, as if proving the toga's Roman origins would somehow prove something about Rome itself. Historians still argue whether the toga was Etruscan, Roman, or something else entirely, and listening to this debate you understand why the arguments never end. There's not enough evidence, not enough written records, not enough surviving garments to settle the question definitively. The Etruscans left behind plenty of art. Their tombs are covered with paintings of banquets and games and daily life. But the paintings show garments that look both familiar and strange, similar to togas but not quite the same. The Romans left behind written descriptions, but those descriptions were written centuries after the supposed origins, by people who were guessing just as much as you're guessing now. The truth, if there is a truth, lies somewhere in the gap between what we know and what we want to know, and that gap is wide enough to accommodate almost any theory. The debate shifts, as debates will, to the question of why the toga matters at all. Someone asks, with the genuine curiosity that wine sometimes produces, why Romans care so much about a piece of clothing. Why does it matter where it came from? Why does it matter how it's worn? Why does it matter that one man's toga was too short at Saturnalia and another man's was too long at last year's picnic? The questions hang in the air, and for a moment no one answers, because the answers are both obvious and impossible to articulate. The toga matters because it's Roman, and being Roman matters, and anything that helps define what it means to be Roman matters by extension. The toga matters because it separates citizens from non-citizens, insiders from outsiders, people who belong from people who don't. The toga matters because it's difficult, because mastering difficulty demonstrates worth, because the struggle itself proves something about the people who undertake it. But even as these answers form in your mind, you recognize their inadequacy. They are circular, self-referential, built on assumptions that might not hold if examined too closely. The toga matters because we say it matters, because we've agreed collectively that it matters, because the alternative, admitting that it's just fabric, just clothing, just one more arbitrary marker in a world full of arbitrary markers, would unravel something fundamental about Roman identity. The toga is a story we tell ourselves about who we are, and like all such stories, it requires constant repetition and reinforcement to maintain its power. Every morning, when you wrap yourself in wool and go out into the world, you're telling the story again. Every afternoon, when you sit on a blanket with friends and debate its origins, you're telling the story again. Every evening, when you return home and let it fall to the floor, you're preparing to tell the story again tomorrow. Livia, who's been quiet during the debate, offers an observation that cuts through the theorizing. "You know," she says, "my grandmother used to say that garments are just garments, but the people in them are what matter." It's a simple statement, almost naive, but it lands with the weight of generations behind it. Her grandmother, you realize, would have been born before Rome was an empire, before the toga became the symbol it is today, back when the distinction between Roman and non-Roman was less certain and more contested. She would have seen changes in fashion, shifts in meaning, whole systems of significance rise and fall. And through it all, she held on to the belief that the people matter more than what they wear. You're not sure you believe that, entirely, but you want to. In this moment, with the light fading and the conversation softening, you want to believe that the person in the toga matters more than the toga itself. The debate continues, but more gently now, less like an argument and more like exploration. Someone mentions the Greeks and their hemations, and whether the toga was a response to Greek fashion or an independent development. Someone else brings up the Celts and their trousers, and the way Roman writers used clothing to mark the boundary between civilization and barbarism. The conversation ranges far and wide, touching on topics you've never considered, raising questions you've never asked. And through it all, you're aware of your toga, still there, still demanding attention, still slowly unraveling despite your best efforts. But it feels different now, less like an enemy and more like a participant in the conversation. It's the subject, after all. It's what everyone's talking about. And in being the subject, it's become something more than just fabric. It's become a symbol, a marker, a point of connection between people who might otherwise have nothing to talk about. You reach for more wine, and your toga shifts, and you adjust it automatically, without thinking. The movement draws a glance from Marcus, who's long since given up on his own garment, and he offers a small smile that seems to say, keep fighting, if that's what you need to do. You return the smile, grateful for his acknowledgement, and turn back to the conversation that continues to flow around you. The debate has moved on now, from origins to meanings, from history to philosophy. Someone is arguing that the toga represents the weight of Roman citizenship, the burden of belonging, the responsibility that comes with privilege. Someone else is arguing that it's just clothing, that we read meaning into it because we need meaning, that the toga itself is neutral and we're the ones who make it matter. Both arguments seem true, somehow, even though they contradict each other. Both arguments capture something about the strange relationship between Romans and the garments they wear. The light continues to fade, and with it goes the sharpness of the debate. Words come more slowly, punctuated by longer pauses. The wine cups empty and are refilled, empty and refilled, in a rhythm that feels almost ritualistic. You're tired now, in a good way, the kind of tired that comes from a day well spent among people you enjoy. The toga still sits on your shoulders, still demands occasional attention, but it feels lighter than it did this morning, less like a burden and more like a companion. You've worn it all day, struggled with it all day, and somehow that shared struggle has transformed it from an enemy into something almost like a friend. You'll take it off tonight, let it fall to the floor, and tomorrow you'll put on another one and start the whole process again. But for now, it's here, and you're here, and the conversation continues, and that's enough. The afternoon has ripened into early evening, and something has shifted in the atmosphere of the picnic. The debates have faded, the stories have been told, and now the group has settled into that comfortable silence that comes only after hours of shared company. People recline on the blanket in various states of relaxation, some dozing lightly, others staring at the sky, a few still murmuring in low voices about nothing in particular. The wine continues to circulate, but slowly now, as if everyone's agreed that the goal is no longer intoxication but simply the pleasant maintenance of this moment. You're among the ones still awake, still aware, still present, and you find that for the first time all day, you're genuinely relaxed. The toga helped you achieve this, in its own strange way. Hours of constant vigilance have finally exhausted your capacity for vigilance, and somewhere in the last hour you stopped checking for shifts and slips and potential disasters. You stopped monitoring every movement, stopped calculating every adjustment, stopped treating the garment as an enemy to be fought. You just let it be, let it do what it wanted, let it find its own configuration on your body. And surprisingly, once you stopped fighting it, the toga stopped fighting you. It settled into a position that's not exactly correct by formal standards but is undeniably comfortable, the fabric draping in ways that feel natural rather than imposed. You're not sure what you look like right now. Probably a mess, probably the kind of disheveled that would have horrified you this morning. But for the first time all day, you don't care. Looking around the blanket, you see that you're not alone in this surrender. Every man here has reached the same point, their togas now in various states of graceful collapse. Marcus, who gave up hours ago, looks almost comfortable in his ruin, the fabric pulled around him like a nest. Lucius, who maintained his dignity longer than most, has finally let go, his sinus hanging at an angle that would have sent him into a panic this morning but now seems to cause him no concern at all. Even Gaius, who seemed so determined to maintain standards, has relaxed into the evening, his toga doing things that togas were never meant to do. And none of it matters. The judgments that seemed so important earlier have evaporated in the fading light, replaced by the simple pleasure of being here, together, at the end of a good day. You think back to this morning, to the hours you spent standing in your dressing room, agonizing over choices that now seem trivial. The bronze fibula versus the silver one. The simple belt versus the decorated one. The scuffed shoes versus the pristine ones. You made your choices, and they were fine, and no one noticed or cared, and the whole elaborate calculation turned out to be exactly as significant as you feared it might be. Not significant at all. The irony isn't lost on you. You spent more mental energy on your clothing than you've spent on some business decisions, and in the end, the clothing was just clothing, and the day was just a day, and the people around you were just people who'd made their own choices and had their own anxieties and were now, like you, letting go of all of it in the soft light of early evening. Livia shifts beside you, and you're aware of her presence in a way you haven't been all afternoon. She's been part of the background until now, one of the faces on the blanket, but something about the evening's intimacy has brought her forward, made her more present. She's looking at the sky, watching the first stars emerge in the deepening blue, and her expression is peaceful in a way that makes you want to be peaceful too. You follow her gaze upward, and together you watch the stars appear, one by one, until the sky is scattered with points of light that seem to have no pattern but somehow feel ordered nonetheless. Beautiful, she says, quietly, and you nod because words feel unnecessary. Beautiful is exactly right, but the word captures only a fraction of what you're feeling. The beauty of the sky, yes, but also the beauty of this moment, this gathering, this shared experience that required so much preparation and delivered something that preparation could never guarantee. You think about all the picnics you've attended over the years, all the gatherings and dinners and formal occasions, and you realize that the best ones always end like this. Not with a bang, not with some memorable event, but with quiet, with peace, with people sitting together and watching the stars and feeling grateful for no particular reason. Someone, you think it might be Gaius, begins to hum, a tune you don't recognize but that feels ancient, feels like something your grandfather might have hummed on evenings like this. The hum spreads, others picking it up, until the blanket is filled with a low, wordless music that seems to rise from the group itself rather than from any individual. You find yourself humming too, joining the chorus without deciding to, and the sound wraps around you like the toga you've stopped fighting. It's comfortable. This music. It's right. It's exactly what this moment needs. The humming fades after a while, replaced again by silence, but a different silence now. Fuller, richer, carrying the residue of the music like perfume in a room after the flower has been removed. You're aware of your body in new ways. The grass beneath the blanket, the cool air on your skin, the weight of the toga that's become almost invisible through long familiarity. You're aware of the others too, their breathing, their small movements, their presence as physical facts in the world. You're all here, together, sharing this moment, and the sharing makes the moment more than it would be alone. That's the secret. You realize. That's what all the anxiety and preparation and performance was really about. Not the clothing, not the judgments, not the fear of getting it wrong, but this. Being here, together, at the end of a good day. Livia speaks again, her voice soft in the darkness. Do you do this often? She asks, and you're not sure what this means. Picnics? Stargazing? Being present in moments of quiet connection? You answer anyway, telling her about other gatherings, other evenings, other times when the sun went down and the stars came out and people sat together in comfortable silence. You tell her about your grandfather, who used to say that the best conversations happen without words, and she laughs softly and says her grandmother said the same thing. The connection feels significant, though you're not sure why. Two grandparents, both gone now, both offering the same wisdom to grandchildren who probably didn't appreciate it at the time. You appreciate it now, sitting on a blanket in the fading light, sharing silence with people who've become friends over the course of an afternoon. Marcus has fallen asleep, his collapsed toga rising and falling gently with his breathing. Lucius notices and smiles, gesturing for someone to cover him with a corner of blanket, and the small kindness touches you in ways you don't expect. This is what friendship looks like, you think. Not the grand gestures, not the formal declarations, but small attentions, quiet care, the instinct to protect someone who's vulnerable even in something as minor as sleep. Marcus will wake later, embarrassed probably, and everyone will pretend not to notice, and the moment will pass without comment. But you'll remember it. You realize. You'll remember the way Lucius reached for the blanket, the way he covered his sleeping friend without being asked, the way the rest of you pretended not to see because seeing would break the spell. These are the moments that matter, not the fashion choices, not the anxieties, not the hours of preparation. These small kindnesses, shared among people who've chosen to spend an afternoon together. This is what you came for, even if you didn't know it. The stars continue to emerge, more and more of them, until the sky is so full of light that you can't imagine how it held all of them hidden during the day. You lie back on the blanket, carefully, aware of your toga but no longer anxious about it, and let the stars fill your vision. Livia lies back too, beside you, and together you watch the universe unfold above you. No words now, just presence, just being. The afternoon that started with so much anxiety, so much preparation, so much fear of judgment, has ended here, in silence, under the stars, with people who've become something more than acquaintances over the course of a few hours. You'll remember this, you think. You'll remember this long after you've forgotten what you wore. The time has come to leave, and you feel that particular sadness that accompanies the end of something good. The stars are fully out now, the sky a deep velvet scattered with light, and the campus Martius has grown quiet around you as other picnickers have gathered their belongings and drifted away into the night. Your group is among the last remaining, a small island of blanket and bodies in the vast dark expanse, and the knowledge that you'll soon have to move, to gather your things, to make your way home through streets that will feel different after dark. This knowledge sits at the edge of your awareness like a guest who's overstayed but hasn't yet been asked to leave. Lucius begins the process of gathering, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he too wants to stretch this moment as long as possible. Others stir, Marcus waking from his sleep with a start and then a sheepish grin, Gaius stretching arms above his head in a way that finally completes the destruction of his toga. You watch them all with a fondness that surprises you. These people who were strangers or casual acquaintances this morning have become, over the course of an afternoon, something closer to friends. The shared experience of eating and drinking and talking and being together has done its quiet work, binding you in ways that will persist beyond this evening, that will shape how you greet each other in the forum, how you remember each other when you're apart. You rise carefully, testing your body after hours of reclining, and the toga rises with you. It's a different garment now than the one you put on this morning, wrinkled, shifted, stained in small ways that you'll discover tomorrow when you examine it in daylight. But it's also the same garment, the same wool, the same stripe, the same fibula holding it all together. The difference is in you, not in it. You've worn it through an entire afternoon, through anxiety and relaxation, through vigilance and surrender, and it has become part of you in ways you didn't expect. You'll take it off tonight, let it fall to the floor, and tomorrow you'll put on another one and start the whole process again. But this toga, this specific garment, will carry the memory of this afternoon in its fibers, in the stains and wrinkles and small damages that mark its passage through time. You gather your basket, lighter now, the food consumed, the amphora empty, and sling it over your arm. The walk home awaits, through streets that will be darker than this morning, through a city that transforms at night into something both familiar and strange. You say your goodbyes, the simple words that mark the end of gatherings everywhere. Thank you, it was good, we should do this again. The promises feel genuine, even though you know that schedules will conflict and intentions will fade and months may pass before you see some of these people again. The sincerity of the moment matters more than the accuracy of the prediction. You mean it now, in this moment, and that's enough. Livia stands beside you as the group disperses, and you realize you'll be walking in the same direction for at least part of the journey. The offer to accompany her forms on your lips almost without thought, and she accepts with a small nod that seems to acknowledge the naturalness of the arrangement. You fall into step together, leaving the blanket and the remaining guests behind, walking into the night with the ease of people who've spent an afternoon in each other's company and found it good. The streets are different after dark. The crowds have thinned, the merchants have closed their stalls, the usual chaos of Roman daily life has settled into something quieter, more mysterious. Lanterns glow in upper windows, casting pools of light onto the pavement below. Voices carry from behind closed doors, fragments of conversation you can't quite make out. The city feels intimate in a way it never does during the day, as if the darkness has pulled everyone inside and left the streets to those who have reasons to be out after hours. You and Livia are among them, walking slowly, not hurrying, letting the journey stretch to match your desire to prolong the evening. The toga feels different now too, in the cool night air. The wool that was oppressive in the afternoon sun now provides welcome warmth, wrapping around you like a blanket meant for exactly this purpose. You pull it closer, adjusting automatically, and the movement draws Livia's attention. She glances at you, then at the garment, and offers a small smile that seems to acknowledge the journey you've both been on. Not just the walk home, but the whole afternoon, the whole experience of wearing and worrying and finally letting go. You return the smile, and for a moment you're connected in a way that doesn't need words. She asks about your family, your work, your life beyond this evening, and you answer with a frankness that surprises you. Normally these conversations are performances, carefully curated presentations of self designed to impress or deflect or maintain boundaries. But something about the night, the darkness, the intimacy of walking together through empty streets, has lowered your defenses. You tell her about your father, his expectations, the weight of carrying his name through a world that doesn't always make it easy. You tell her about your mother, gone now, and the ring you keep but can't wear. You tell her about the anxiety that filled your morning, the hours of standing in your dressing room, the fear of getting it wrong that nearly kept you from coming at all. And she listens, really listens, in a way that makes you feel seen in ways you're not used to feeling. When she speaks, it's with the same frankness, the same willingness to be real. She tells you about her own life, her own struggles, the expectations placed on women that are different from those placed on men but no less heavy. She tells you about her grandmother, the one who said that garments are just garments, and how that wisdom has carried her through moments when the weight of appearance threatened to crush her. She tells you about the relief of being here, tonight, away from the judgments that follow women everywhere, able to just be herself for a few hours among people who didn't expect anything more. You listen, and you understand, and the understanding deepens the connection that began on the blanket under the stars. The streets unfold before you, familiar and strange, leading you gradually toward the neighborhoods where your paths will diverge. You slow your pace without discussing it, both of you aware that this walk will end soon and wanting to stretch it as far as it will go. The toga shifts with your movements, and you adjust it without thinking, and Livia laughs softly and says you've been doing that all afternoon. You laugh too, because it's true, and because the laughter feels good, feels like release, feels like the natural end to a day that began in anxiety and is ending in something closer to peace. At the corner where you'll part, you stop and face each other in the dim light of a distant lantern. The words you want to say feel inadequate, too small for the weight of the evening, but you say them anyway. "Thank you, it was good, I'm glad we walked together." She nods, and for a moment you think she might say something more, but instead she just smiles, that same small smile that's been appearing all afternoon, and turns to continue her journey alone. You watch her go, her figure gradually disappearing into the darkness, and then you turn toward home, walking the last blocks with the awareness that something has shifted inside you. Something you won't fully understand until tomorrow, when you wake and remember this evening and try to make sense of what it meant. Your front door closes behind you with a solid thunk that separates the night outside from the warmth within, and you lean against it for a moment, letting the day's accumulated weight settle into your bones. The atrium is dark, the fountain silent, the slaves retired to their quarters, and you're alone with yourself for the first time since this morning. Since before the anxiety began, since before you stood in your dressing room and agonized over choices that now seem so distant they might belong to someone else. The toga still hangs on your shoulders, warm from the walk, carrying the smells of the evening, wine and grass and the faint sweetness of honey pastries. You'll take it off soon, let it fall to the floor, but not yet. Not quite yet. You walk slowly through the dark house, your feet finding paths they've walked thousands of times, and you're aware of your body in ways that surprise you. The muscles of your left shoulder, where the toga rested all day, are sore in a way that feels earned, like the memory of labor. Your right arm, which reached for food and wine and made countless small adjustments, feels loose and tired. Your back, which supported the whole construction through hours of reclining and walking and standing, complains quietly as you move. You're worn out, physically, in the way that follows days well spent, and the weariness feels good, feels right, feels like evidence that you were really there, really present, really engaged in the business of living. You reach your dressing room and stand before the mirror that witnessed your morning anxieties. The figure that looks back at you is almost unrecognizable. Toga askew, wrinkles everywhere, the sinus hanging at an angle that would have horrified you 12 hours ago. The bronze fibula still holds, somehow, still keeps everything from complete collapse, but just barely. You look like you've been through something. And you have. You've been through a day, a whole day, from anxious morning to peaceful night, and the evidence is written all over your clothing and your face and your tired eyes. You look at yourself and you smile, because the man in the mirror is not the man who stood here this morning. That man was worried about judgments that never came, anxious about choices that didn't matter, afraid of a future that never arrived. This man has been through the future and come out the other side, and he knows now what he only suspected then, that the anxiety was the worst part, that the actual living was fine, that the people on the other side of the door were just people, with their own anxieties and their own fears and their own desperate hope that they wouldn't be judged too harshly. You begin the process of undressing, which is really just the process of letting the toga do what it's wanted to do all day, fall off. The fibula comes out first, sliding free of the fabric with a small sigh of release. The toga shifts, loosens, begins its final collapse. You guide it gently, not fighting, just helping it find its way to the floor where it pools in a white heap that looks almost like a sleeping animal. You step out of it, free of it for the first time since morning, and the sudden lightness makes you almost dizzy. Your tunic underneath is damp with sweat, wrinkled from hours of compression, but it feels like freedom after the weight of the toga. You pull it off too, standing finally in just your skin, the night air cool against your body, and you close your eyes and breathe. What will you remember from this day? You wonder, when the details have faded and only the shape remains. You'll remember the anxiety, probably, because anxiety leaves deep tracks. You'll remember standing in this room, holding togas, paralyzed by choices that seemed momentous and were actually irrelevant. You'll remember the walk through the city, the weight of the wool, the fear of falling. You'll remember arriving, scanning the blanket, reading the room for clues about whether you'd gotten it right. You'll remember the food, the wine, the conversation, the slow unraveling of both your toga and your vigilance. You'll remember Marcus sleeping, and Lucius covering him, and the way small kindnesses accumulated into something like love. You'll remember Livia, and the walk home, and the feeling of being seen by someone who had no reason to see you. You'll remember the stars, emerging one by one, and the silence that settled over the blanket like a blessing. What you won't remember, probably, is what anyone wore. You won't remember the details of Lucius's toga, or Gaius's, or Marcus's unfortunate garment from last year that still follows him like a shadow. You won't remember the color of Livia's stola or the way her hair was arranged. You won't remember the fibulae and belts and shoes that seemed so important this morning. Those details, which consumed so much mental energy, will fade into the background, replaced by the things that actually mattered, the connections, the conversations, the moments of shared humanity that occurred while you were all so busy worrying about your clothing. The clothing was just the frame. The picture was everything else. You bend and pick up the fallen toga, gathering the heavy wool in your arms. Tomorrow you'll give it to your slaves for cleaning, and they'll examine the stains and wrinkles and make their own judgments about how you spent your day. They'll know, probably, that you were at a picnic, that you ate honey pastries and spilled wine and sat on grass for hours. They'll know that you fought the toga and the toga won, that you ended the day looking like a man who'd been through something. And they won't care, not really, because they have their own lives and their own concerns, and your fashion choices are, at most, a minor source of entertainment. The judgment you feared from them, from everyone, was always smaller than you imagined. People are too busy with their own lives to spend much time judging yours. You lay the toga over a chair, where it will wait for tomorrow's attention. The tunic joins it, and the belt, and the shoes placed carefully beside each other. The bronze fibula goes into its box, joining the other small objects that help you become who you are each morning. You stand in the dark room, naked and tired and strangely peaceful, and you think about the day that's ending and the night that's beginning and all the days that will follow. Tomorrow there will be new anxieties, new choices, new moments of standing before mirrors and wondering if you're getting it right. But tonight there's just this, the quiet house, the tired body, the mind slowly letting go of the day's concerns. Tonight there's just you, and the memory of stars, and the knowledge that you showed up, you participated. You lived through an afternoon that started in fear and ended in peace. You walk to your bedroom, to the bed that waits for you, and you lie down in the darkness. The day sounds fade, the distant noise of the city, the small creaks of the house settling, the last murmurs of your own thoughts. Sleep approaches like a tide, slowly, inevitably, and you let it come. You let go of the day, of the anxiety, of the judgments real and imagined. You let go of the toga and everything it represents. You let go of the need to be anywhere or anyone other than exactly who you are in this moment. A tired Roman, after a long day, falling asleep with the memory of stars in his eyes. And as you drift, you think about tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days after that. You'll receive another invitation eventually, and the anxiety will return, and you'll stand in this room again, holding togas, wondering what to wear. But you'll also remember this night, this peace, this knowledge that the anxiety is always worse than the reality. You'll remember that the people on the other side of the door are just people, with their own fears and their own hopes and their own desperate need to belong. You'll remember that the toga is just fabric, that the judgments are just noise, that what matters in the end is showing up and being present and letting the day unfold however it will. You'll remember, and the remembering will help, a little, until the next time you forget and have to learn it all over again. The stars continue their slow march across the sky outside your window, indifferent to your sleep, indifferent to your anxieties, indifferent to the whole vast enterprise of Roman fashion and Roman identity and Roman life. They've been there forever, those stars, watching generations of Romans wrap themselves in wool and worry about what to wear. They'll be there tomorrow, and the next day, and long after Rome itself is just a memory, a story told by people who never lived here. And somewhere in that vast indifference is a kind of comfort, a reminder that your anxieties, however real they feel, are small in the grand scheme of things. The stars don't care what you wear to a picnic. The stars don't care about anything. And somehow, that not caring frees you to care about what actually matters. The people around you, the moments you share, the brief and precious time you have to be alive in this world, under these stars, wearing whatever toga you chose that morning. Sleep comes, finally, gently, and you let it take you. As the night deepens and the city settles into its own rest, you carry the memory of this day with you into dreams. The toga will be there tomorrow, waiting, ready to be worn again. The anxiety will return, ready to be felt again. The friends will gather again, ready to share food and wine and conversation again. And through it all, you'll carry this evening with you. The stars, the silence, the simple peace of being exactly where you are, with exactly who you're with, wearing exactly what you chose. It's enough. It's always been enough. You just had to live through a day to remember it. Sweet dreams.